Now, Chris embarks on a journey of rediscovery, but the scars of betrayal run deep. Will he rise from the ashes or be consumed by his wife's deception? Chris Dumas was caught off guard by Anne-Marie's blunt words that, while she still cared for him, she simply wasn't in love with him anymore. "I think we need to take a break," she said. "Just some space. Why don't you move into the guest room for now?" 18 years of marriage seemed to vanish with that one sentence. Feeling lost, he agreed to the change. She reassured him it was temporary, and they would discuss things later. As he packed, he overheard her laughing on the phone, talking about someone else. The thought stung. Not only was she not in love with him, but she had already found someone new. Upset, he packed his things and didn't just move to the guest room. Instead, he walked out of the house and slammed the door behind him. "I've told him before not to slam the door, but you know how men are. They never listen." Anne-Marie chuckled to her friend Vicky. "I wonder where he's going." Chris found a room at the Econo Lodge on Pinhook. He rented it for a week, collected the key, and entered the small, musty room where the smell of smoke lingered from the last guest. "Jim, hey, this is Chris," he said tiredly. "Chris Dumas from the DeGard office?" "I know who you are," Jim Miller, head of the legal department, replied with a laugh. "What's up?" Chris wondered why he had left. He had always been the one providing for their family. It was his house. She had never contributed to the mortgage. Still, he didn't like the large house they shared. With just 3 people living there, one bedroom always went unused. Anne-Marie stored her things in both that room and the guest room. They had a guest room, but he couldn't remember the last time anyone stayed over. Anne-Marie had wanted the house, and so they bought it. Maintaining the yard took a lot of effort, and Chris often felt tired afterward. He didn't want to hire someone to help. Caring for the yard would have been easier if it had been simple grass, but there were many different areas. A cluster of shrubs here, a flower patch there, and a decorative statue in the corner. This made it impossible to use a riding lawnmower, so he had to use a regular mower, which was tiring. Anne-Marie and their daughter Nicole didn't help either. They preferred activities that interested them, mostly at the country club. "Actually, Chris, this is quite something," Jim said lightly. "You pay all the bills, charge her rent until the divorce. You're going to file for a divorce, right?" Chris felt a heavy weight settle in his stomach. He had never thought about getting a divorce. Looking in the dirty, foggy mirror of the motel's dim bathroom, he didn't like what he saw. He used to be a strong young man with a nice tan and bright smiles. He had a full head of brown hair and sparkling brown eyes. When did he become a tired, balding man with a pale face? He was only 40 years old. Anne-Marie had thrown him a big birthday party with all of their friends, all of her friends. He didn't think any of those people cared about him, except for Sweet William and Sandra. He had to remind Anne-Marie to invite them. He wondered if she had been unfaithful with Mr. Pussy Eater during that time, if Mr. Pussy Eater had been at their party. He wondered if their daughter missed him, if Nicole was asking her mother where Daddy was. Probably not, he thought with a sigh. Around the time he started looking like the tired man in the mirror, she stopped looking up to him and just tolerated him. As long as he paid the car payments and insurance and the country club fees and tennis lessons, Nicole put up with him. He wondered if Hank and Sophia Campion, his in-laws, were celebrating. It had taken 19 years for them to pull their precious little girl away from him. They had money. He worked hard for every penny, and Anne-Marie spent it all. The mattress smelled of smoke, as did the pillows. He sighed heavily. He had forgotten to take his toupee off. He got out of bed, found the stand for it, carefully took it off, placed it on the stand, and then got back into bed. Sleep would not come. He lay there imagining his beautiful wife with another man. He pictured her being intimate with someone else, something she had been good at before Mikey passed away. When Mikey didn't wake up that morning, it marked the start of his troubles. Anne-Marie was heartbroken when the baby didn't respond to her cries. 4-year-old Nicole stood in the doorway and cried over the loss of her baby brother. After that, they rarely connected in the same way, and Anne-Marie insisted on protection, afraid of getting pregnant again and losing another baby to SIDS. "That's when it happened," he said aloud. "That's when I got lost." He glanced at the bedside clock. 10:41. "But it changes now," he resolved. At 10:41, I'm going to change my life. She rolled over slowly. Last night was the first time in years she had slept alone, and it felt wonderful. She had never noticed before how loudly Chris snored, how much he tossed and turned, and how rude he could be while they slept. "Where's Daddy?" Nicole asked with a frown at the breakfast table. "He's at work. Why?" Anne-Marie replied. "'Cause," Nicole stomped her foot, "I need to pay Cindy." Cindy was Nicole's tennis coach. "Well, call him at the office. I'm sure he just forgot," Anne-Marie said casually. "Oops, Mama's got an appointment. I'm running late." Waking up wasn't that hard for him. He hadn't really slept. Taking a shower in the motel's bathroom felt like a chore. The water was lukewarm and barely trickled from the rusty faucet. The cheap toiletries provided by the motel didn't help, leaving him feeling like he could use another shower. The old iron in the room didn't seem reliable, so he chose a shirt that looked decent enough and got dressed for the day ahead. Jim had told him what needed to be done, and that was going to get his full attention today. Tom Sampo. Just hearing the name sounded strong and confident. Anne-Marie smiled as Tom hit the ball straight down the fairway, over 270 yards. That's how they met. Her parents, Daddy and Mama, had wanted to play 18 holes of golf, but a group of 3 wasn't as fun. Mr. Trapani, Daddy's friend, had called last minute to say he couldn't make it. "I'd be happy to join y'all," Tom had said with a smile, shaking Hank's hand. Tom Sampo. The men shared a golf cart, but Tom still found little ways to connect with Anne-Marie when they were standing around. At first, she thought it was accidental, but his playful smile made her blush. At the clubhouse later, his touches were still light and seemingly innocent, nothing too forward. "So, Tom, you're in investments?" Hank asked as they enjoyed their drinks. "Yes, it's smarter to have your money work for you rather than working hard for it," Tom replied, launching into a detailed explanation of his ventures. "Hope I see a lot more of you," he whispered in her ear as they were about to leave. The next time she saw him at the country club, he wasted no time. Before long, she found herself in his Mercedes, driving to his house in Church Point. She was impressed by the elegance of his home, which was over 200 years old, and even more by the fine, classic furnishings upstairs. Tom made her feel special, and their connection grew stronger each time they were together. "It's been a while since I was with Chris, but you never really forget." She felt a bit guilty when she saw Nicole's car at the club, but that feeling faded away when Tom whispered sweet words in her ear. Most of the men at the West Bayou Country Club respected her marriage and kept their distance. Others held back because she was Hank Campion's daughter. When she asked Tom about it, he just shrugged and gave his charming smile. "I saw something I liked," he said. "When I see something I want, I go for it and don't stop until I get it." Again, she felt a twinge of guilt as she glanced at her tired husband across the dinner table. She had never cheated on him before. Sure, she had felt tempted, but she never acted on it. That guilt eased a little as she listened to her husband complain about his tough job, the bills, and how the yard needed more care. Chris smiled tiredly as Sandra dropped off another cup of coffee. "Too much coffee isn't good for you," she murmured. "How would you know? You don't have one," he joked, using his usual reply. "I did before my operation," she teased and left. Chris took a few more moments to finish canceling the last of his credit cards. "It's rough, but since you're the only one working, she still gets half of everything," Jim had said. The country club hesitated until Chris reminded them who his father-in-law was, Hank Campion. Then they agreed to refund the rest of his dues. "That little troublemaker," Hank fumed when Tim Vallot, the country club president, called to inform him about the cancellation. "I'm sure Mrs. Dumas and Nicole will want to keep their memberships," Tim suggested. "Yeah, just call Anne-Marie," Hank replied. Anne-Marie was embarrassed when the manager called her cell phone right in front of Tom. The waitress served their drinks, and Tom smiled at her, signing the bill. "Sweetheart, I just need to call him to sort something out," she said casually, and pressed Chris's office on speed dial. "Did you really cancel our membership?" she whispered, turning slightly away from Tom. "Didn't see a point in keeping it," he said casually. "I don't use it, so why should I pay? If you want to use it, you pay for it or ask your dad to." "But what about Nicole?" she asked, barely containing her frustration. "Hey, you know what? She's a student. She can use your membership." "You will regret this," she said into the phone, even more upset when he laughed and hung up. Sandra peeked into the office when she heard Chris sobbing. Softly, she walked in and placed her hand on his trembling shoulder, embracing him as he held onto her waist and cried. "Hey, is everything okay?" Tom asked, noticing the worried look on Anne-Marie's face at the registration table. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Dumas," the older woman replied politely as her American Express card was declined. "I don't get it," Anne-Marie said, confused. "Just put her and your daughter Nicole on my application," Tom generously offered. "Wait, I also need to pay Cindy," Anne-Marie said, realizing the extra cost. "Can I write you a check for her fees?" "Yes, ma'am," the older woman replied cautiously, "but there will be a $35 fee for any bounced checks." "We have enough money in the account," Anne-Marie said tightly. However, the account balance was significantly lower than it had been the night before. The certificates of deposit were only in his name, with Anne-Marie listed as a beneficiary, so changing Nicole's name for Anne-Marie's on those was straightforward. "I'm sorry," the manager said with a tight smile as Chris finished processing the transactions. Chris noticed that the manager seemed to understand the situation. He had encountered it before. "Thanks," Chris replied wearily. "I just found out yesterday. Everything is changing." "Where should I send your statements?" the manager asked. "Are you still living at?" Chris provided his office address and felt thankful. He hadn't considered that and wondered what other details he would need to manage. "You're quite the troublemaker," Anne-Marie teased as Tom playfully teased her. "Just wait until I make things even more interesting," Tom replied with a grin. "Not a chance!" Anne-Marie laughed. "You can't do that." Tom playfully shifted his attention, complimenting her as he teasingly tried to get closer. She playfully squealed as they shared a kiss. "Yes, I'll make it exciting for both of us," Tom promised as the moment became more intense. Anne-Marie hesitated for a moment, realizing she hadn't prepared for any consequences, but then laughed through the tension, thinking it would be surprising for Chris if things changed. "You don't look so good, boss," Sweet William said, poking his head into Chris's office. "I mean more than you usually do." "Yeah, well, I found out my marriage is over," Chris said. Sweet William was a big man, standing 6'8" and weighing close to 340 pounds. He looked tough, but he was really a kind and loyal friend. "Oh, man, are you serious?" Sweet William asked. "I'm really sorry to hear that. Anne-Marie was such a nice person." "Yeah, well, she found someone else to be nice with," Chris replied. "Want me to talk to him?" Sweet William offered. "As tempting as that sounds, no, I'm just going to let the lawyers handle it," Chris shrugged. "So, are you going to hit the clubs?" Sweet William smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Yeah, you think the ladies will be all over me?" Chris joked. Sweet William laughed. "Man, don't try to talk like that. You're not really like that," he chuckled. "But I can picture the ladies showing interest. When you get rid of that hairpiece, no one is going to be fooled. Oh, and get some new clothes. The ones you have on look like they belong in a thrift store." "What?" Chris said, surprised. "Get rid of the hairpiece. Get some better clothes." "I sometimes forget I need to explain things to you," Sweet William said. "Wait, what's wrong with my clothes?" Chris asked. "Nothing, unless you're 80. They might look good at a retirement home," Sweet William replied. "I'm not saying you have to buy a lot, but you should at least try to get something different, you know?" "Sandra, come here," Chris called. "Yeah?" Sandra asked, giving Sweet William a playful nudge as she walked by. "This guy thinks I need new clothes," Chris said. "And told him to get rid of the hairpiece, too," Sweet William added. "Really? And?" Sandra replied. "Huh," Chris said. "Do you think I need new clothes, too?" "And lose the—" Sweet William started. "Stop it, Sweet William," Chris interrupted. "And get rid of the hairpiece," Sandra agreed. "It doesn't look good." Anne-Marie was angry when she hung up the phone. The bank confirmed that there was enough money for Nicole's tennis lesson, but not much more. "That can't be right," she grumbled as she went upstairs to find last month's bank statement. The closet door was slightly open. She hadn't closed it after changing that morning. She opened it wide to look in the file cabinet where Chris kept all their important papers. He was very organized about things. It was empty. For the first time, she noticed that all of Chris's clothes were gone from the little space he had in their bedroom closet. She opened the one drawer in the dresser that he used and found it empty. Marching down the hall, she pushed open the door to the guest bedroom. The bed hadn't been made. She checked the drawers. Her old sweaters were in the top drawer, and the jeans that no longer fit were in the next two drawers. The bottom drawer held her swimsuits. The closet had more of her clothes, but no sign of his things. She sat down hard on the bed. He wasn't supposed to leave. He just needed to step out of their bedroom so she wouldn't feel guilty when she saw him. After a while, she got up and went downstairs. She found her cell phone in her purse. She almost laughed at how much her hands were shaking. "Chris, I hope you're sitting down," Jim said sadly. "Yeah, sitting is all I do," Chris replied, trying to lift the mood. "We got pictures and his address. He's renting a place in Church Point," Jim said quietly. They weren't trying to hide it. Lynn said it was the easiest job she ever did. They looked like they were posing. "Well, we knew that much already, right?" Chris asked. "Yeah, but the judge will want proof, not just what you heard," Jim said. "Then file already," Chris said. "I can file, but I can't represent you. Louisiana is different, and I don't have a license there," Jim explained. "I'll send you a list of lawyers. 3 of them are in Lafayette. Jennifer Lacombe is the best, but she can be tough." "Thanks," Chris said. Just then, the inside line rang, bypassing Sandra. "Chris, honey?" Anne-Marie asked. "Yes, Anne-Marie, honey," Chris replied, trying to keep his voice steady. Anger was building up inside him. They hadn't even bothered to be discreet about the affair. If he had to guess, he'd say it was happening at the country club, and right in front of their daughter. Anne-Marie sensed his anger. "He knows," she thought. Honey, I thought you were going to, sleep in the guest bedroom until we could talk?" she asked. "No, but why not have your boyfriend move in?" Chris suggested. "I'm sure he would love the guest room." "Boyfriend?" Anne-Marie laughed nervously. "What boyfriend?" "The one we have pictures of, you two together," Chris said, lying since he hadn't seen any pictures. "Oh, and there's a nice shot of him being close to you. You seem to enjoy that." She hung up the phone, feeling tears start to form. Sweet William had suggested that Chris begin walking. "It's a mile to Highway 19 and back," Sweet William said. "I bet I can run there and back before you even leave the parking lot." "I'm not a betting man, especially when I know I'd lose," Chris laughed. Sweet William had scoffed when Chris asked about joining a local gym in DeGard or Lafayette. "Yeah, it's a good place if you're looking for trouble," Sweet William said. "All those people out there just want to help you out." "Oh, so what am I supposed to do?" Chris asked. "First, do 1 push-up tomorrow morning, then 1 sit-up, 1 crunch, and 1 squat," Sweet William said. "1? I can do at least," Chris said. "Then the next day do 2. 2 push-ups, 2 sit-ups, 2 crunches, and 2 squats," Sweet William explained. "Then move on to 3, 4, and keep going until you reach 100 each, got it? I know you can do 8 or even 9 before getting too tired, but this way, you will build up your strength." "Not only are you kind of funny-looking, but you're also smart," Chris replied. "Yep, I'm heading back to work tomorrow, but I'll make sure Sandra watches out for you so you don't slack off," Sweet William said with a smile, shaking Chris's hand. "I don't want to hear any excuses like, 'I can't do this today.'" "There's no time like today," Chris agreed. When he first attempted to walk a mile, he struggled to return to the office and spent the rest of the day groaning. His suit was soaked with sweat, and his tie was ruined. "Thank goodness. That tie wasn't very nice anyway," Sandra said. He looked at his clothes again. For years he had picked out clothes from the clearance section, saving money so Anne-Marie and Nicole could have more of what they wanted. What they wanted quickly turned into what they needed. His needs were always put aside. That didn't help me much, he thought. He checked his wallet. There was 1 credit card in his name. Norman James, the CEO of PPDI, had advised him to get one just for business expenses. "Sandra, come here," he said. "What?" she replied, annoyed. "You're taking me shopping," he instructed. "For me?" she asked playfully. "How exciting." "No, for me," he said, struggling to get to his feet. "Oh, that's no fun," Sandra teased. "Not meant to be," Chris said, grimacing as he moved. "Where's Daddy?" Nicole asked. Anne-Marie looked up from her meal and stared at Nicole. Chris had been away for 4 days now, and other than asking about a sports fee, Nicole hadn't mentioned him at all. Anne-Marie had hoped Nicole wouldn't notice his absence, and if she did, wouldn't ask. Anne-Marie searched for the right thing to say. "Because I need to get my racket fixed," Nicole continued. Oh, for goodness sake, just use mine, Anne-Marie snapped. She was relieved that Nicole didn't seem to care where her father was, only where his wallet was, and felt frustrated that the girl didn't seem to care about his absence. Yeah, right, Mom. Yours is even worse than mine, Nicole scoffed. Anyway, I already took it to Red's. They're working on it now. Fine, I'll call Daddy, Anne-Marie sighed. Why? He'll be home soon, right? Nicole asked, glancing at the clock. Jambalaya's his favorite, right? Anne-Marie glanced down at the plate. Jambalaya was Chris's favorite, though she hadn't thought of that when she started making it. She had been in a rush, realizing she was running late, and decided to cook something quick and easy. No, Nicole, Daddy's not coming home tonight, Anne-Marie said quietly. Oh, Nicole shrugged and continued eating. Come on, Sandra, be serious, Chris said with a grin when she held up a lime green pullover shirt. Not for work, silly, but look, Sandra said, holding it up in front of him. It brings out the brown in your eyes and hides some of that gray in your hair. Your wife's right, the salesperson chimed in with a smile. She's not my... Chris began, but Sandra kept going. And you can wear this with jeans or khakis. What do you wear when you're not at work? Sandra asked, teasing him. Jeans, I guess, Chris replied with a shrug. Not the cheap ones that don't fit, right? Sandra said, giving him a playful look. Well, Chris mumbled. Here, and I bet this red one would look good too, Sandra added, piling more clothes onto the ones Chris was already holding. She turned to the salesperson. He needs a couple of suits. You help him with that, and I'll get him some casual stuff. Yes, ma'am, the salesperson said with a wide smile. What kind of work do you do? Division manager for Pilot Petroleum, Chris answered. The salesperson glanced at Chris's worn-out suit and scuffed shoes. Well, congratulations. When do you start? He asked, not knowing Chris's background. Over Sandra's laughter, Chris replied, 12 years ago. Now stop laughing, Sandra. Without saying where she was going or when she'd be back, Nicole walked past Anne-Marie and left the house. A moment later, Anne-Marie heard her car start up. It didn't sound quite right. She made a mental note to ask Chris to check on it. He hadn't been home in 4 days, and except for one phone call, she hadn't heard from him. He knew about the affair. She wondered how he had found out so quickly. Guilt began to eat away at her. Her parents didn't like Chris, but he had been a good husband and provider. Chris had started out working on the oil rigs, then became a mudlogger. After a few years, Benoit Hydraulics had recruited him, and he excelled at his job. When Norman James launched Pilot Petroleum Exploration and Development, he immediately offered Chris the position of division manager, even though Chris didn't have a college degree. Norman's instincts about Chris had been right. Chris worked long hours and ran a tight ship. Many of his crew didn't mind the hard work because they knew Chris had been where they were. He had started from the bottom, and they respected that. Anne-Marie picked up her phone. Tom continued driving down the road, his mind elsewhere, thinking about the day's events. Sweat dripped down her face even with the air conditioning running full blast. Please, she whispered, aware that her struggle intrigued him. Please what? He teased, as she felt her muscles tighten around him. Please, I want you to come closer, she said softly. He started to move, and she let out a small noise of discomfort. When he playfully nibbled her shoulder, she gasped in response. Great, he muttered as his phone rang. Don't answer it, she pleaded, but he was already pulling away. Hey there, thinking about you? Anne-Marie's voice spoke from the phone. Of course, he replied, lying as he brushed his hand over his face. I was thinking I might come visit, maybe stay the night. What do you think? Anne-Marie asked. I'd love that, but the power's out, Tom said with a smile as Cindy knelt down beside him. No power means no air conditioning. You can imagine how hot it is here. Oh, really? Anne-Marie said, then made a sudden choice. You should come to me. I'll be there in 10 or maybe 30, he replied. You're quite the charmer, you know that? Cindy said as she stood up. What? He asked, watching her grab her things. You weren't planning to stay, were you? He continued. No, she admitted. By the way, I like how you look, he said as he leaned in for a quick kiss. Did it for you? She said lightly. What does your husband think? He asked curiously. He loves it, Cindy replied. And remember, you have a lesson at 10 and I prefer my students to be on time. Should I work on my backhand or my serve? Tom asked as he walked toward the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and carefully took off his wig. Chris disliked how he looked without it and almost put it back on. Gathering his courage, he opened the door. "Nice, very nice," Sandra said encouragingly. "That shirt looks great on you, and it's refreshing to see you without that wig." She drove him to a nearby hair salon run by Walter, a stylist with a cheerful demeanor. "You know, how about we try a buzz cut? Maybe with a number 3 guard," Walter suggested. "We won't be going for anything fancy, right?" "Just keep it even all over?" Sandra asked. "Exactly. No need for fancy styles," Walter smiled, leading Chris to the sink for a thorough wash. "By the way, love your shirt. Where did you find it?" If Nicole heard any noises from her parents' room, she didn't show it. She didn't comment on the unfamiliar man at the table enjoying pancakes. She merely nodded when Anne-Marie introduced them. "She'll be graduating in a few months," Anne-Marie said with pride. "Wow, really?" Tom responded with a bright smile. "College, right?" Nicole looked at him for a while, then continued eating. "High school," Anne-Marie answered for her daughter. "Are you going to college?" Tom asked. "Yeah," Nicole replied, not looking up. "The best choice I made was to take a year off between high school and college," Tom said. "I traveled from Florida to Canada, then across to the West Coast and spent some time in California." "Uh-huh," Nicole said as she finished her breakfast. "Don't share that stuff with her," Anne-Marie whispered sharply when Nicole left the kitchen. "Why not?" he asked, fiddling with the tie of her robe. "I learned a lot more than I would have from just reading." "Just stop," Anne-Marie insisted. "Chris and I have saved a lot for her college, so please leave it." "Do I ever tell you I like your style?" Tom asked, joking around. "No, you don't," she laughed, pushing his hand away. "I need lunch money," Nicole said flatly, as if she hadn't noticed the playful exchange. "Sure, how much do you need?" Tom asked, pulling out some cash. "That's enough," Nicole said, taking the money without a word of thanks, then left and slammed the door behind her. "Nice kid," Tom commented and tried to hug Anne-Marie again. "Stop that," Anne-Marie protested, laughing as he pulled her closer. "No, Tom," she said softly, trying to push him away playfully. "Oh, sorry, I'm looking for Chris Dumas." "You might have seen him, little white guy, not very fashionable, with a messy haircut," Sweet William said as he walked into Chris's office. "Hey, Sweet William, what do you want?" Chris grinned. "Oh no, I see someone is trying to dress better," Sweet William said, reaching out for a handshake. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but you're right," Chris chuckled, shaking hands with the larger man. "I heard that," Sweet William laughed. "Man, you're looking sharp." "Thanks, Sweet William," Chris replied gratefully. "So, are you dating anyone?" Sweet William asked as he settled into a chair. "Not really focused on that," Chris said. "I can't believe Anne-Marie would do this to me." "I get it," Sweet William agreed. "Sandra mentioned you're going to the lawyer today. Want me to come along?" "What, so I can say you're my assistant?" Chris joked. "You couldn't handle me as your assistant," Sweet William laughed. "But I'd really be the best you've ever had, do you get that?" "I can believe it," Chris chuckled. "Willie, would you like some coffee?" Sandra asked as she set a cup down in front of Chris. "No, but thanks anyway," Sweet William replied with a smile. "You know, sitting down like this, I'm almost at your eye level," Sandra said with a grin. "Thanks, Sweet. I appreciate you wanting to join me, but I'll pass," Chris replied quickly as he took a sip of the hot drink. Hank clenched his jaw as he heard Anne-Marie speak. He had wished for this day for a long time, but instead of feeling proud, he felt frustrated. Rather than just leaving quietly, Chris was being difficult. Chris even had the nerve to ask for rent. He expected Anne-Marie to pay him rent and utilities, and how was she supposed to find that money? All right, he sighed. "How much do you need, dear?" "Well, I'm not sure," Anne-Marie said. "Rent is just silly, but I do need money for food, and Nicole needs—" "I offered to help with all of that," Tom jumped in, "but Anne-Marie wanted to manage on her own." "Thanks for that," Hank said as he slid a check for $2,000 to Anne-Marie. Jennifer Lacombe looked through the photos and notes that Lynn had collected. She glanced at the tired man and gave him a kind smile. "Jim and I went to school together," she mentioned. "I've told him many times I'm glad he doesn't work here in Louisiana. I wouldn't want to face him in court." "He said the same about you," Chris smiled. "He told me to make sure you avoid Texas." Jennifer laughed before becoming serious again. "I love the idea of charging her for rent," she said, "but you probably won't get it." unless the judge is not thinking straight. Still, it adds a little pressure and makes them second-guess themselves. I also took half of what was in our savings and checking accounts after paying off the credit cards, Chris continued. Got it, Jennifer agreed. I guess our next step is to file and have her officially served. It felt so awkward. A man came to the door, asked for her, and then handed her a stack of papers. You've been served, he simply stated before leaving. Nicole and Tom were there, watching her. Tom was very supportive, while Nicole paused for a moment, realized it wouldn't affect her either way, and then left the room. The candles were a nice touch. Usually their relationship was intense, but tonight was calm and gentle. He held her close while she cried, and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, he helped her find a good divorce lawyer and drove her to the lawyer's office. He was her support during this tough time, her source of strength. And her father agreed to pay the lawyer's $5,000 fee. When Nicole showed up at the courthouse, his hopes about his role in her life were shattered. Dad, you're being such a jerk, she said, tossing her mother's wedding ring into his hand. He had asked for the ring in the divorce settlement. It had belonged to his mother, just like it had belonged to her mother before her. It seemed that Anne Marie had no trouble replacing the small ring, judging by the bigger one she now wore. Nicole had been wearing his mother's ring on her pinky finger. He remembered a time when their mothers almost fought at the wedding because Sophia Campion made a rude remark about the ring Chris had given Anne Marie. To others, that ring might not hold any value, but it meant a great deal to Chris. It was a piece of his family's history. He had lost almost his entire family in Hurricane Andrew in 1992, including his parents. He missed them deeply, but felt a strange relief that they didn't have to see how spoiled and selfish their granddaughter had grown. When he didn't receive an invitation to her high school graduation or party, it felt like ice was building up around his heart. When his card was returned with a note saying, "You can't buy my love," the ice turned solid. Watching her flirt with Tom Sampo, giving him those starry-eyed looks and then calling out, "Dad, you're being such a jerk," made the ice even harder. Chris didn't feel happy or sad when he heard the news. He just didn't care. He wasn't moved by the photos of Anne Marie and Tom Sampo's wedding in the Daily Advertiser. Again, he just didn't care. The fact that Hank had rented the country club for the wedding and spent $8,000 on a baby blue dress meant nothing to him. He flipped through the rest of the headlines and then read about a new coach for the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. He might actually win a game or two, he said to himself. So when Sandra told him that Tom Sampo had vanished with all of Anne Marie's money and her parents' money, along with a good chunk of Frank Trapani's money, he still didn't care. Hearing that Anne Marie had taken out a second mortgage on the house he disliked and was at risk of losing it didn't affect him either. When he found out that Anne Marie's car and Nicole's car had been taken back because Tom hadn't made any payments on them, he just shrugged. It felt to him like hearing someone say they had stepped on a couple of bugs. It didn't matter at all to him. The fact that Tom had left Anne Marie when she was 8 months pregnant didn't even make him feel any happiness. "Huh," was all he said before going back to looking at the documents that Justin James had sent him. "I'm sorry, sir," the gate attendant said with a nervous smile. "This ticket is not valid." "I'll go to the counter to fix this." Tom smiled at Cindy and gave her a playful pat. "I'll be right back." "Please hurry," she said. "They board in 10 minutes. "Don't worry," he said with a smile as he walked away. "Idiot," he chuckled to himself as he went to Gate 12C to catch his flight to France. Tom didn't think about the tennis instructor or the baby she was expecting as he settled into the comfortable seat in first class. He didn't think about Anne Marie or her daughter Nicole, even though he had told the 18-year-old girl that he married her mother just to be near her. He didn't think about Hank Campion either, who had asked him to call him Dad. He flashed a charming smile at the flight attendant and asked in smooth French when they would serve drinks. Sophia had a serious stroke after Hank revealed that Tom Sampo had been tricking them and had taken away their savings. Any money Hank had saved was now going to the growing hospital bills. Once she was stable, Sophia was moved to UMC, the charity hospital in Lafayette. "Chris," Anne Marie whispered to her father while they waited in the hallway of the hospital. "Chris might be able to help." "You've got to be joking," Hank responded sharply. "Why would he help us now after everything we've done?" "He's still Nicole's father," Anne Marie said. "Could you go see him? I'm too embarrassed. Huh, I never thought of that, Chris said when Sherry Lambert pointed out a fourplex on the edge of DeGard in Bender, Louisiana. He quickly grew tired of the Econo Lodge and rented a loft apartment behind the office depot on Johnson Street. Sandra asked him why he wanted to live in Lafayette when his work was in DeGard. Sherry Lambert and her husband lived next to Sandra and her husband, Jimmy. Our kids play and argue together. In fact, Paula says she wants to marry little Jimmy. Sandra laughed. Anyway, Sherry is trying to become a real estate agent. Chris instructed her to choose a job and stick to it, but he couldn't provide guidance, so he suggested she give him a call. An overweight woman entered Chris's office, took a seat, and asked him what he needed. My needs are pretty simple, he said, glancing as she shifted in her chair. Despite carrying nearly 100 extra pounds, Sherry Lambert was a charming woman. He offered her an encouraging smile, and she responded with a playful grin. I have a feeling we will work well together, she said confidently. The first house they visited was vacant. Scanduro Realtors had marked it for sale. 2 bedrooms and 2 full bathrooms, Sherry pointed out. It has a gas stove in the kitchen. A comment from Anne-Marie had shocked him and made him realize his wife was unfaithful. That pushed him to grab the phone book and look up escort services. Camille arrived 2 hours later and knocked on the door of the motel room. What are you looking for? She asked sweetly while adjusting her shirt. I want to learn how to please a woman properly, he admitted without hesitation. Camille was taken aback. Most of her clients had different interests. Okay, she replied, then explained her different services and what they cost. So, $200 for that? Chris inquired. Yes, but I can do something special for you, Camille offered. No, not really, Chris said. How about $100? She suggested, trying to make a deal. Chris shook his head, insisting he wanted to learn. I want to do this right. I won't learn if you act like I am, he explained, a bit frustrated. Got it, Camille acknowledged. She spent the next couple of hours showing him how to please her. You want to practice? Try using a lifesaver and put your tongue into the little hole, she advised before taking her payment. The following night, Chris called another service and they sent a woman named Tony. Are you serious? She asked, looking skeptical when Chris explained he wanted to learn how to please her correctly. Thanks to Camille's guidance, Tony left his motel room smiling. Yeah, I enjoy this, Chris said, feeling confident. Chris and Sherry were having a conversation while they checked out an apartment. Sherry mentioned her husband with a laugh, but the focus soon shifted back to their current task, looking at the space Chris was interested in. This place is nice, Sherry said, glancing around the efficiency apartment. You could easily rent out the upstairs and downstairs, and the tenants would cover your mortgage. Chris smiled. I like things simple. I think I'll just stay down here and rent out the other units. You said 2 are already rented? The room itself was quite spacious, about 16 by 16 feet. A small kitchen sat in one corner, equipped with a table, a refrigerator, and a stove. The window over the sink faced the parking lot, and the bathroom was close by. There was even a closet under the stairs, which also housed the air conditioning unit for both floors. Sherry adjusted the blinds and turned to Chris with a playful smile. Think this place will work for you? Chris looked around thoughtfully. Yeah, I think it'll do just fine. Later, Chris confided in Sandra about his concerns. Sherry's married and it just feels off. Sandra, knowing Sherry's situation, shook her head. I'm not surprised. Sherry's husband, Ronnie, doesn't seem to mind much of anything. He just goes along with whatever she says. Sandra had heard from Sherry that she found Chris to be a good guy and was enjoying helping him find a new place to live. However, the tension of the situation was not lost on any of them. The focus remained on the apartment and the decisions Chris needed to make about his new living arrangements. Despite the distractions, his main priority was securing a comfortable home for himself while navigating the complexities of the relationships around him. I didn't know you could do something like that so well. You should spend more time doing it in a different way. Come on, that's not true, Chris laughed. I actually hope I end up pregnant. It's about time Ronnie helped more around the house, Sherry giggled when Chris asked her about being careful. Don't get comfy, you're not sticking around, Chris said when Hank Campion walked into his office. Well, listen, Chris, Hank stammered. It was hard for him to come face to face with someone he had disliked for so long, and Chris's blunt words caught him off guard. What do you want, Hank? Chris sighed and glanced at the ledger on his screen. Well, you know Sophia had a stroke and is stuck in bed, Hank said, hesitating. Chris's steady gaze made Hank feel even more uncomfortable. And? Chris asked after a long pause. And we've hit a rough patch. She's at the UMC, and you know Sophia would prefer anything over being there, Hank said nervously. Chris sighed again. Hank, I hope you aren't here to ask for money, Chris replied, looking back at the screen. Remember? Anne-Marie already took half. Yeah, well, she and Nicole, Hank mumbled. That's not my issue, Chris said, typing away. They're both grown up. I don't know why I even came here, Hank said angrily. Neither do I, Chris agreed. I was nothing to you when I was with your daughter, and I'd bet if I had asked you for anything, you'd have laughed me off. Hank muttered insults as he left Chris's office. Chris wondered if Hank had started drinking again. He seemed a bit off. Chris shrugged and finished his work, saved it, then started to loosen his tie. Is that your father-in-law? Sandra asked from the doorway as Chris got ready for his noon jog. No, he's nobody important, Chris replied, stretching. Sandra watched, somewhat amused. He had really lost weight and toned up well. Even with the bulky outfit, she noticed his strong arms and chest. His stomach had slimmed down, too. Playfully, she gave him a light tap as he walked by. He surprised her by playfully tapping her back. By the way, Sherry sends her regards, Sandra said. Really? How is she doing with insurance, right? Chris smiled as he reached the reception area door. Yeah, I think she might actually do pretty well with it, Sandra agreed as she settled back at the front desk. That's great. Tell her I said hi, Chris replied as he opened the door, bracing himself against the cold February wind. Sophia passed away that afternoon, as if aware she was causing trouble for her husband, daughter, and granddaughter. I hope you're happy now, Hank cried over the phone. Sophia died this afternoon. To be happy, Hank, I'd need to care about her, Chris said flatly. But thanks for letting me know. Hank was shocked by Chris's cold response. Anne-Marie was taken aback when Hank finally managed to repeat what Chris had said. That doesn't sound like him at all, she gasped. Are you sure that's what he said? Her mother's death felt like just another loss. When she fell in love with Tom, she believed they were building a beautiful life together. Chris had been a good husband and provider, but things had become less exciting lately. She managed to trade her old Lincoln Continental for a lovely Lexus. Tom took care of all the paperwork while she and Nicole browsed for a smaller car for Nicole. In the divorce agreement, she chose to keep the house to leave Chris's retirement savings untouched. Jewelry, fancy watches, and designer clothes were handled by Tom. Then there was the 2-week cruise. He even brought her parents and Nicole along, and everyone was excited to hear about the new baby. She watched as Tim Villot entered the dining room and looked around at the guests. He was rather short, and she always found him a bit amusing. When his eyes landed on her, he waddled over, his face tight with concern. I am truly sorry, Mrs. Sampo, he whispered. But why? She stammered, confused. This was her home. She had grown up here. How could this man who worked for her father say she had to leave, that she was no longer welcome at the West Bayou Country Club? Cindy's earlier message about canceling Nicole's lessons started to make more sense. Cindy had seemed flustered while saying she was canceling Nicole's lessons, not just one lesson. Tom didn't answer his cell phone, and when she called his office, there was just a mechanical message saying it was temporarily out of service or disconnected. Then her cell phone rang and she felt relief. Tom could help her fix this, but instead, it was Nicole. She was upset with Nicole. She had chosen to take Tom's advice and live a little before heading to college. So far, Nicole thought her idea of living life was to lounge around the house all day in very short or tight clothes and pose in front of her new stepfather. My car is gone, Nicole cried out. What? Anne-Marie yelled back. Are you sure? Where are you? What happened? I went in to buy some new shoes. Mine were looking bad. When I came back, it was gone. Nicole was now in tears. Then why are you calling me? Call the police, Anne-Marie shouted into the phone. Don't yell at me, Nicole cried even more. Anne-Marie found out where Nicole was, told her to call the police, and said she would be there as soon as possible. Come on, Tom, please answer, Anne-Marie whispered into the phone. But again, she got his annoying voicemail. When the police arrived, Anne-Marie frowned. Nicole was wearing the shorts she had asked the girl to throw away. They were inappropriate. The police officer was trying not to stare, as Nicole's top was too small, too. "Yes, ma'am. It seems Giles took it back," another officer said. "Took it back? What?" Anne-Marie gasped in disbelief. "Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. We checked the vehicle identification number, and that's when they told us it was on their lot," Officer Ray Holloway explained. "This is absurd," Anne-Marie said, pulling Nicole into the car. "Nicole, why are you dressed like that?" Anne-Marie said sharply as they drove to the car lot. "What?" Nicole shouted back. "I was just going to get shoes. I didn't think I needed to dress up." "Thank you, Mrs. Sampo. I see you got my message." John Hargroder smiled as Anne-Marie rushed into the sales office, Nicole following her. "Thank you for bringing your car in. I hope you took your things out of it?" Anne-Marie had to sit down. John was polite to both of them, but showed no sympathy. A quick look at her bank account revealed she didn't have enough to pay the back rent. "But that can't be," Anne-Marie said, looking pale. "We just did a second mortgage, and this is absurd. Let me talk to someone." The manager was very sorry, but there was nothing he could do. Tom Sampo and his wife had closed all accounts that very morning. "His wife?" Anne-Marie exclaimed over the phone. "But I'm his wife." "I'm really sorry, ma'am, but I can't help you," the manager replied. "The accounts were only in his name or yours, if they were both in your name." As a last option, she paused for a moment and remembered that Nicole didn't seem to have any plans to use her college fund. She and Chris had carefully planned and put almost every extra penny into the college fund. When Mikey was born, Chris had asked for a raise at work, and he put every bit of that extra money into a college fund for his child. After Mikey passed away, $200 from that fund was moved to Nicole's account. Now, that account had nearly $29,000 in it. Chris was very careful with money and often made sacrifices to ensure a secure future for his child. The manager showed understanding, but Nicole had taken that money out with Tom's help last month. Nicole felt small under her mother's anger. "So that's it," Anne-Marie said softly as she put down the phone. Everything seemed to be falling apart. Her mother's passing felt like just another piece in a long line of troubles. The funeral for Sophia was a respectful event, fitting for someone with her reputation. Thankfully, Hank and Sophia had already arranged for their funeral expenses, and Tom hadn't managed to get either of their life insurance policies. Anne-Marie touched the flowers. Chris was kind to send something like that. Chris ignored the thank you note Hank sent for the flowers he hadn't actually sent. Chris thought Hank was trying, though not very well, to make him feel guilty. He remembered the simple floral arrangement that Hank and Sophia had sent to his parents' funeral. Hank was wealthy and could have provided many beautiful flowers, but instead sent something very plain. Chris had held back his frustration and sent a thank you note. He didn't expect a reply, and none came. He tossed Hank's note into the trash and continued to go through the mail that Sandra had left on his desk. Nicole felt relieved. Her period had started. In the beginning, when she and Tom were together, he always used protection. "You know what?" he whispered to her. "I hope your mother finds out about us." She felt a thrill at the thought of her mom discovering them. But now she understood Tom didn't truly care for her or her mother. He had only used them. She tidied herself up and left the bathroom. Her mother looked tired and worn out. Anne-Marie glanced at Nicole as she entered the room and tried to smile. Then, suddenly, she gasped in pain. Father and daughter offered comfort to Anne-Marie as they drove to the hospital. UMC was the hospital where her mother had passed away. She had hoped to give birth at Women's and Children's Hospital, the same place where Nicole and Mikey arrived into the world, and Tom had promised to take her there. But when he left her, after his lies became clear, she decided to sell the jewelry he had given her. The 2.5-carat ring turned out to be just glass. The metal wasn't even real gold. She found out when she brought it to the jeweler who had provided the box it came in. "Yes, we sell those boxes often," the man said with a kind smile. "But that ring isn't ours. It's not genuine gold." "But it didn't leave marks on my finger," she argued. He raised an eyebrow and pointed to the signs of clear nail polish. Sophia Marie Campion was a lovely little girl, weighing 6 pounds, 9 ounces. As she grew, she would inherit her father's charming smile. Chris waited in line at the after-hours registration at the University of Louisiana at DeGard. It was clear many were interested in learning to cook real Cajun meals. He already knew many basics, thanks to years of watching his mother cook. But there were some dishes he hadn't tasted since she passed away. Plus, it was a good chance to meet new people. It had been some time since Sherry had come by. She was facing some issues with her pregnancy, so she couldn't move around much. Considering the attention he was getting, finding someone else to spend time with wouldn't be hard. His eyes fell on another table that had no one at it. A poorly handwritten sign taped to the wall read, "Motorcycle Maintenance." As a kid, he had dreamed of owning a motorcycle. His cousin Terry had one, but Terry had been careless and lost his life in an accident while trying to outrun a truck. His parents used that chance to say no to a motorcycle for him. Later, marriage and being a parent prevented him from ever getting one, and the thought had faded away. While he was looking at the few brochures on the table, a young woman approached and sat down behind it. She wore fitted blue jeans tucked into boots and a leather vest. Chris noticed a gold chain that hung between her breasts, but didn't see any necklace. She grimaced at him as he glanced her way. "Unless you can do what my girlfriend can, you should leave, old man," she said sharply. "Do I need to do that to learn motorcycle maintenance?" Chris replied, unaffected by her attitude. "Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm just so used to older people trying to hit on me," she said quickly, trying to grab the sign-up sheet. "Well, maybe don't show off if you're not interested," Chris suggested, glancing at the brochure. "I can wear whatever I want," she shot back. "Sure, but it's easy to think there's a reason to notice if there's a big sign up," he replied. "Anyway, what kind of bike do you have?" she asked, remembering why they were talking. "I don't have one right now," he admitted. "It'll be tough to learn how to care for it if you don't have it yet," she teased. "But I'm looking," he said. "Oh, my husband has one he's trying to sell. Want to check it out?" she offered. The motorcycle started with a roar, and April smiled as he climbed on behind her. At 5 feet 2 inches, she just managed to hold the bike upright, but she did and kicked it into gear. "Be careful with your hands," she warned as he wrapped his arms around her. The motorcycle was a 1949 Indian Chief, full of power. Chris noticed a very heavy man rolling his wheelchair over to where they stood. "Now that's a piece of American history," the bearded man said, pointing to the motorcycle. "What's your price?" Chris asked. $15,000, the man replied, lovingly touching the handle of the throttle. "Does it run?" Chris asked. "Nope, but it has all the original parts. Well, except for the seat and the rubber," the man said, pointing to a box in the corner of the garage. $12,500 cash, Chris offered. "Okay, fine," the man said, then smiled sadly. "If I hadn't broken my neck, you'd have a harder time getting this bike no matter the price." "How did you break your neck?" Chris asked. "I was deer hunting and fell from the deer stand, landed on my head," the man explained. "Wow, that's tough," Chris said. The man looked at Chris, nodding in thanks for recognizing his situation. "Yeah, things happen," the man said and shrugged. "Thank goodness I have this lady looking after me." "Hey, stop calling me that," April replied, but her tone was light. "So what does your husband think of you and your girlfriend?" Chris asked when April led him back to his plain company car. "No girlfriend. I just say that to keep annoying guys away," she said honestly. "Right, so maybe I'm trying to weasel my way in?" Chris smiled as he unlocked his car door. "You can try," April said, eyeing him from head to toe. "Don't think you'll get far, but you can try. Class is at 7:30, Tuesdays and Thursdays until 9:30. Do you remember how to find my trailer?" "Yep," Chris said with a grin as he got into his car. "Thank you." Anne-Marie's cheerful voice came through the phone. "That was so nice of you." Chris was surprised when the office line rang. Very few people had that number. He answered the phone quickly because it could be important. "What is it?" he asked. "I don't get what you're saying." "The brush and comb set came in that nice silver box," Anne-Marie exclaimed. "Anne-Marie, I have no idea what you're talking about," Chris replied. "I would never send you anything. Please don't ever call me again. Got it?" He hung up before she could reply and looked toward the office door. "Sandra!" he called out. "Yes," she answered, standing in the doorway. "Did you send a brush and comb to Anne-Marie with my name on it?" Chris asked. Sandra saw the stern look on his face and realized she may have made a mistake, but she knew it was better to be honest with him. "Yes, I did. It was for her baby. I thought you'd want to do something nice for her. She was your wife for almost 19 years, Chris. Sandra said. Was my wife, Chris said, barely containing his anger. Sandra, don't ever do that again, do you understand? Yes, sir, Sandra replied softly, scared for the first time in her 13 years working with Chris Dumas. Nicole didn't look at her mother. Tears were common in their shared apartment. If Sophia wasn't crying for a bottle, needing a diaper change, or wanting to be held, Anne-Marie would be crying. Anne-Marie's tears often came from being tired. Sophia kept her up day and night and sometimes from feeling sorry for herself. Her phone beeped and she smiled. It was Zach. She had met him at the hospital while he was doing community service. Hey, are you one of the moms? He asked, noticing her figure. No, she laughed. Wanna be? He teased with a grin. She laughed and gave him her phone number. Can't you stay in just one night? Anne-Marie pleaded as Nicole quickly fixed her hair and headed for the door. Nicole didn't answer. She just shut the door behind her, not thinking about the baby who was finally sleeping. Luckily, the door didn't wake the sleeping infant. Chris and April worked on the motorcycle, boring out the piston chambers. After spending all day staring at a computer screen and looking at data, he enjoyed the practical work much more. April was the instructor, but Jimbo often gave the real instructions. April would run inside to ask him a question and then return to tell Chris what to do next. From time to time, Jimbo would squeeze into his small wheelchair and roll outside to watch the work on his favorite motorcycle. While it was being fixed, Chris was using Jimbo's Harley. No way I'm selling it. April keeps saying she wants it, Jimbo chuckled when Chris asked about buying it. Come on, Jimbo, that bike is bigger than she is, Chris laughed. Yeah, but she believes that someday she'll ride it herself, Jimbo replied. Come on, Jimbo, April said as she pointed to a part of the bike for Chris. Hey, old man, did you forget something? Oops, Chris said and tightened a bolt again. And stop calling me that. Okay, put gas in the tank and give it a try, April grinned. Chris held his breath as he positioned himself to kick-start it. He smiled wide when the engine coughed and then roared to life. Awesome, he shouted as he shifted into first gear. I think he's ready, don't you think, Jimbo? April said while she collected the tools. Yeah, Jimbo agreed with a hint of sadness as Chris slowly drove around the garage area. Tell him to come in. We'll have a little celebration. Zach and his band played their loud thrash metal music for a bit before Rudy's mother yelled at them to stop. Then the 5 musicians shared some treats and talked about their dreams of success. Living the dream! Zach exclaimed loudly. Hey, Nicole said with a frown. What do you need that for? You have me? Oops! Zach laughed. Huh? Nicole whispered, looking hurt. Why would you want anything else? He doesn't want you, I'll take a chance with you, Rudy offered cheerfully. Yeah, he'll take you, Zach joked. Nicole looked at him, tears starting to well up in her eyes. Aw, don't start with the tears, Zach said, losing patience. I can't stand that, come on. Nicole covered her face and hurried out of the garage. And another one's gone, and another one's gone, Philip sang. Hey, you're next. Another one bites the dust, Zach chimed in. Forgetful of Rudy's mother's warning, they began singing loudly a silly version of a popular song. Thanks again, Chris said as he shook Jimbo's hand warmly. Uh-huh, I think April wants to see you, Jimbo mentioned. Chris looked around the messy living room but didn't see her. He peeked into the equally cluttered kitchen. I think she's outside, Jimbo said softly as he slowly wheeled himself toward the doorway. She smiled when he came near his motorcycle. Jimbo said you wanted to see me, he said. No, just wanted a ride, she said with a smile. Chris and April were talking as they prepared to leave. April hopped on the back of the bike, holding on tightly to Chris. Where are we going? Chris asked. Your place, April replied. Chris suddenly stopped the engine, surprising her. What's going on? April asked. Jimbo's my friend, Chris said seriously. I'm not getting involved with my buddy's girl. April smirked. He already knows. He's the one who said I should. Chris wasn't convinced. We'll see about that, he said, stepping off the bike and heading back to the old trailer. When he returned, April still looked confident. Let's go, he said, starting the engine again. They rode together, but the short trip to his apartment felt too brief, so Chris took a longer route, enjoying the open road. The thrill of the ride made him laugh out loud as they sped down the highway. That was fun, April shouted excitedly when they finally arrived at Chris's place. Yeah, it was, Chris agreed, letting her inside. April looked around, impressed by how neat the apartment was. Chris had painted the walls a soft yellow, and the wood trim was a pale green. The carpet, though inexpensive, felt plush because of the double padding underneath. Everything was clean and orderly, from the spotless kitchen counters to the perfectly made bed with its peach-colored spread. April glanced at the bed, then started to remove her shirt, but Chris hesitated. He came up behind her and gently kissed her neck, helping her take off the shirt. "Don't be gentle," April said, her voice tense. Chris was confused but tried to comfort her. He brushed her hair aside and kissed her shoulder. Suddenly, April snapped, "I said don't be gentle." Chris sighed, realizing what she wanted, but instead of continuing, he stopped. He wanted to keep things lighthearted, but it was clear their expectations were different. The moment hung in the air, tense but unresolved, as Chris focused on making sure everything stayed respectful and calm. Chris moved toward her, his face tense with frustration. "Do what I say and don't try anything," he warned, his voice low. She nervously complied, though her mind raced. He was rough, his movements aggressive. She flinched at his touch but forced herself to remain calm, not wanting to provoke him further. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with tension, and her discomfort was clear, though she tried to hide it. Chris continued without showing any gentleness, his demeanor cold. He seemed focused on exerting control, oblivious to her resistance. As the situation escalated, April's protests grew louder, her discomfort turning into anger. "Stop! I don't like that!" she yelled, pushing back against his actions. But Chris ignored her, continuing to assert dominance, leaving her feeling trapped and powerless. She was overwhelmed, tears brimming in her eyes, but she fought to stay composed, not wanting to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Eventually, when things slowed down, she caught her breath, her body tense. She asked him to change things, to let her take some control. "Let me do this my way," she requested, hoping for a shift in the power dynamic. But Chris refused. "No way," he said flatly, and continued his aggressive approach. The encounter was draining, emotionally and physically, but April fought through it, waiting for the moment it would finally be over. When it ended, she started to move, but Chris grabbed her again, preventing her from leaving. She protested angrily, but he remained insistent, ignoring her words. The intensity of the moment had left her exhausted, but she was still defiant. Despite everything, she wanted out of the situation. Finally, as she struggled to regain her composure, the room fell silent. Chris seemed to calm down slightly, but the air remained thick with the weight of what had just happened. She looked at him, her body tense, unsure of what would come next. After a long pause, Chris lay beside her, his mood shifting. "So let me ask you something," he said, as if trying to casually move past the intensity of what had just unfolded. "You keep saying no, so how am I supposed to know if you really mean it?" "You would know," April replied, showing a big knife and pressing it against his throat. "Got it? You would know." Zach was in his favorite car, a 1978 Z28 Camaro. He had Metallica blasting as loud as it could go. He laughed as he noticed other drivers looking annoyed at him. He parked in the back lot of the Acadiana Mall and lit a cigarette. Suddenly, the driver's window broke and Zach coughed on the smoke. A tall man reached in, turned off the music, and pulled Zach out of the car by his long red hair. "Hey, I heard you like hurting little girls," the masked man said. "Well, I like teaching punks a lesson. Looks like it's your lucky day." The big guy held Zach by his hair, lifting him off the ground, and slapped him hard. Zach felt dazed from the hit and tasted blood from his split lip. "Yeah, hurting little girls is fun, right, Zach?" the man asked and hit him again. "It's even better to deal with a punk who thinks he's tough. How do you like it now? You enjoying this?" Zach started crying as the man slapped him 2 more times before letting him drop onto the asphalt. "So, which hand do you use when you show them who's in charge?" the man asked, opening Zach's car door. "I bet it's your right hand, isn't it?" Zach screamed in pain as the man slammed his hand in the car door. "And don't blast that nonsense music anymore, it gave me a headache," the man said as he walked away. "Next time, play something good, like Aretha Franklin or Roberta Flack." When Zach reported this to the police, they didn't seem very caring. He had a few bad encounters with them over the years, plus, it sounded hard to believe that a masked man just started hitting him out of nowhere. They could also smell smoke coming from his car, but assured him they would check it out. The officer gave Zach a form for his insurance. "What's your deductible?" the officer asked. "1,000, Zach replied. "Why? I'm legal, man." "Then I wouldn't call them if I were you," the officer suggested. "That window won't cost $1,000 and they'll just raise your insurance." "Ugh, come on!" Zach shouted, slamming his hand on the roof of the car. The police officer shook his head and got into his patrol car, watching as Zach hopped around, holding his injured hand. Chris felt very stressed when he was asked to come to the Lafayette Sheriff's Office for some routine questions. "I don't even know any Zach Wrights," he protested. "Zach Wright, your daughter's boyfriend?" the officer asked, not believing Chris. "I haven't seen her in almost a year," Chris replied. "I didn't even know she was seeing anyone. She's an adult now." The last question had nothing to do with Zach Wright. "So, where did you get that bike?" the officer asked. "I'd love to have one like that." "That, my friend, is a piece of American history," Chris smiled. "I rebuilt it myself, using all the original parts." "That's amazing," the officer said, looking at the bike with envy as Chris kicked it to start. "Do you think you could help out around here for once?" Anne-Marie shouted at Nicole. "Mom, I think I might be pregnant," Nicole said, starting to cry. "Oh, no!" Anne-Marie shouted. "That's just great!" Mother and daughter sat at the small kitchen table and made their plans. They didn't even talk about abortion. It was not an option for them. In the end, they decided Nicole would stay home to take care of her sister, while Anne-Marie looked for a job. Mr. Trapani, Hank's old friend, had mentioned that Anne-Marie would be great for the receptionist position. "And I mean really take care of her," Anne-Marie said firmly. "I don't just mean giving her a bottle and walking away. You have to be there for her." Okay, Nicole said, sounding upset. "Hello?" Chris said, trying to keep his frustration in check. It had been a tough day. First, the neighbor in apartment 4 told him he was moving out at the end of the month to an assisted living facility near his daughter in Jackson, Mississippi. Then, as he had on other days, he thought he saw April on her BMW, but she was gone when he looked. After that, he was asked to come to the Lafayette Sheriff's Office, where they reminded him of a daughter he had tried to forget. There was also a lot of work that David, his vice president, had left undone, and Norman James wanted it finished by the end of the day. Now, his ex-wife was trying to reach him. She had called the main line twice, but Sandra didn't let her through. "I know you don't want to talk to me," Anne-Marie said, angry as well. "I'm just letting you know your daughter is going to have a baby." "Well, that's not my issue," Chris replied. "She's grown up now." Anne-Marie held back her anger as Chris ended the call. "What did Dad say?" Nicole asked as Anne-Marie walked by her. "You really don't want to know," Anne-Marie said sharply. "That's not my child," Zach answered immediately when Nicole called him to say she was pregnant. "Of course it is. Who else could it be?" she shouted. "I don't know who you've been seeing," he replied, pleased when she hung up the phone. Chris smiled as Sandra set a cup of coffee down on his desk. "I can stay if you'd like," she offered. "It's either I stay here with you or go home to watch all my kids and Sherry and Ronnie's kids." "How is Andrea?" Chris asked, taking a sip. "She's adorable," Sandra replied with a smile. "She'll be quite the charmer when she grows up." "Looks just like Ronnie, right?" Chris teased. "No, Chris, I don't think you're the father if that's what you want to hear," Sandra replied, a bit tense. "And I say, thank goodness?" Chris replied. "Sure, all men act tough until it gets serious," Sandra said. "You all think it's fun until there might be consequences." "Hey, I didn't chase after that," Chris defended himself. "And you didn't say no either, did you?" Sandra asked. "Touché," Chris admitted, bending over to check the sonar readings. Anne-Marie sat in the Cadillac Seville and cried. The car had belonged to her mother. Her dad had given it to her. Mr. Trapani didn't want a receptionist. He wanted something else. She felt uncomfortable from how he had treated her, and the things he had said felt very upsetting. She threw open the door and got sick on the dirty ground. Two options, she thought sadly. I can live like this or give up completely. She spotted her daughter's car seat in the mirror and set her mouth firmly. I won't live that way. I refuse, she decided and started the car. I finish in, the girl said excitedly, glancing at the big clock. Oh, just 10 more minutes. Will you be here? Of course, I'll just go home and grab my extra helmet. Chris smiled and pulled away from the McDonald's drive-thru. The friendly girl had joked about getting a ride when he came to pay for his meal. He parked the motorcycle, turned off the engine, and quickly ate his burger and fries. The drink was watered down and too big, so after a few sips, he tossed everything into the trash and rode the mile back to his apartment. Grabbing the spare helmet, he hurried back to McDonald's. He drove up so he could be seen at the drive-thru window and waited for the girl to come out. "Hi," she said cheerfully as she ran over to him. From behind the window, he had noticed her figure. Out in the parking lot, he could see she had a curvy shape. She was around 5 feet 4 inches tall and looked like she weighed quite a bit. Her blonde hair was cut very short, and he guessed she had it tied up under her uniform hat. He smiled and thought, she may not fit the usual standards, but she has a cute vibe. "Hi, I'm Chris," he said, handing her the helmet. "I'm Nikki," she replied, putting the helmet on. "Actually, it's Nicole, but everyone calls me Nikki." "Interesting name," Chris thought. 3 times in one day, huh? "You know, I could be your dad," he joked as he started the bike. "My dad is actually a pretty cool guy," Nikki said as she leaned against him. "So where to?" Chris asked. "I don't care, just ride!" she shouted happily. Chris looked around and then sped out of the parking lot onto Highway 52. There weren't many side streets or traffic lights between McDonald's and the Atchafalaya Basin, so he picked up speed. "This is amazing!" Nikki laughed as he turned off the engine at Huval's levee. "I feel so light!" To show this, she playfully stumbled around, laughing. "How fast were we going?" she asked, catching her breath. "I'm not sure," he grinned. "I was hoping you'd tell me." "Really fast," she said, leaning in for a kiss. She smiled brightly and leaned into him. "I usually like it when it's gentle," she said, pulling his hand closer. "Hey, how about some coffee? There's a place on Highway 19 called Jitters." "Sure, let's go," Chris smiled. She excitedly inched closer to him as he sped down Highway 52 and then turned onto Highway 19, racing to the coffee shop. "You'll need to pick me up tomorrow morning. I work the lunch shift and I have to be there by 10:30, okay?" She chattered while he ordered decaf for himself and a regular coffee with chocolate and raspberry syrup for her. She kept talking and stirring 3 packets of sugar into her drink, often switching topics mid-sentence. "I don't want to burst your bubble, Nikki," he said when she brought up the ride for the next day again. "But by 10:30, I will be busy with work. Can you ask Dad for a ride? Don't you want to see me again?" she asked with a playful pout. "I do want to see you, but that doesn't mean I can just drop everything and come running," he replied with a smile. "Yes, it does," she laughed. "In Nikki's world, it definitely does." He chuckled as he finished his coffee. Nikki and her father lived just down the street from Jimbo's trailer, and Chris thought about stopping by to say hello, but he knew it was really to see April again. "Come in and meet my dad," Nikki said excitedly. As Chris headed up the steps to the door of their old house, he felt a bit nervous. He wondered how he would feel if his own daughter brought home a much older man. Her father, Harold, was polite, but didn't seem overly friendly toward Chris. "No, Nikki," he said with a smile. "I told you I'm not picking you up tomorrow. I'll be working." "Then pick me up after work," Nikki insisted. "Okay, what time do you finish?" he asked. 4, she said, then disappeared before he could say anything more. As Harold walked Chris to the door, he looked a bit sad. "Listen, Nikki, she's, Outside, under the bright light, Chris noticed that Harold looked to be in his 60s. "My Nikki isn't exactly like everyone else," Harold said, a little embarrassed. "It's not that she's slow or anything, but at 24, working at McDonald's is about her best option." "She's 24? Chris said, feeling relieved she was older than he'd thought. "And, hey, if you're not serious about her, please just walk away, all right? Right now, she's in her room planning her wedding and thinking about kids. If things go south, it will take her a long time to move on." Chris listened carefully and nodded slowly. Anne-Marie finished her second cup of coffee and looked around the diner. The lone waitress seemed tired, clearly having a long day. There were 5 tables, and the woman was working hard to keep up with the orders. She glanced at Anne-Marie and smiled faintly. "Want some more coffee, dear?" the waitress asked. "You seem like you could use some help," Anne-Marie said. "You have no idea," the waitress replied. "These kids come in, work a couple of days, and then just leave. I was supposed to finish 2 hours ago, and now who knows when I'll get to go home." Well, I'm not a kid, but I'm looking for a job, Anne-Marie said. Being a waitress might not pay as well as some options out there, but it felt much more respectable. Zach finished filling up the gas tank and put the cap back on. Zach got into his car, surprised when a big man in a mask climbed into the passenger seat. Hey, what did I tell you about that music you play? The man demanded. Just drive. Where to? Zach stammered. I don't care, the man said and turned off the music. Take me to the Zip. You know where that is? Yes, Zach replied nervously. Don't tell me someone like you is scared of the Zip. The man laughed. Take me to Gerard Park, then. This is good, the man said as Zach parked. Get out, we need to talk. Zach thought about running, but knew the man was too fast. You run, and you'll just be more tired, the man warned as he stepped out of the car. I'm not running, Zach said, trying to seem brave. Now what's this I hear about you saying my girl isn't good? The man asked as he approached Zach. I didn't say that, I don't even know who your girl is, Zach replied, noticing the large cutters the man held. What? The man asked, stopping right in front of Zach. You don't know who Nicole is? Well, I know her, but... Zach stuttered. And she said she told you something important, and now you're saying the baby isn't yours? The man continued. How am I supposed to know if she's being honest? Zach shouted. That's not cool, the man chuckled. You shouldn't be saying things like that about her. He grabbed Zach's pants, pulling them down a bit. But we both know a DNA test can show if you're the father, the man said, moving Zach's hands away from his pants. I'll take a sample, and if it turns out you're not, then you have nothing to worry about, right? I am the father, okay? Zach yelled as the man held the cutters close. Now what will you do about that? The man laughed. I don't know, Zach admitted. I mean, you were confident when you were with her. So, what will you do about a baby? The man pressed. I could help with child support or something, Zach suggested. You could? That's your plan? The man shouted, getting closer. You need to be serious about this. You'll pay, you understand? Okay, Zach shouted. So how do you plan to pay? The man asked. Well, I'm in this band and... Zach started. The man burst into laughter, a cold, mocking sound. In a band, huh? What's it called? The We Don't Know What We're Doing band? The We Need Real Jobs band? The big man jeered. No, Zach protested. Be quiet, the man yelled, slapping Zach hard enough to make his nose bleed. You're nothing, got it? Zach fell to the ground, his jeans hanging loosely. Get up and pull your pants up, the man spat. Why do you wear your pants like that? It looks silly and messy. Do you know where that style came from? Zach stood up, fighting back tears. It started in prison. Those guys wear their pants loose so you can tell they're not pretending to be tough. Are you like that, Zach? Are you pretending? The man said, his voice filled with disdain. No, Zach said, voice trembling. Then pull your pants up before I make you regret it, the man warned. Yes, sir, Zach mumbled. Good, I like that. Now listen closely. You're going to go to Petey and ask Nicole's dad for a job, the man instructed, pushing Zach in the chest with his finger. When you get your paycheck, you'll send Nicole some money. What seems fair to you? I don't know, maybe $50, Zach suggested. $50? The man shouted. It's a baby, not a pet. A baby costs way more than that. Let's say $200 a week, okay? $200! Zach cried. He suddenly came to his senses, remembering the man's fist aimed at him. The man was gone. He got up from the dirty parking lot and entered his car. He drove home quietly, feeling frustrated about Nicole Ann Dumas for being in his life. He stared at the thin kid who nervously asked for a job and shook his head. Zach Wright. That was Nicole's boyfriend, the one the sheriff's office had mentioned. Son, Chris finally said, stopping Zach's stammering. Do you even know what we do at Pilot? Not really. I mean, you guys are in the oil business, right? Zach replied. Correct. We're in the oil business. We explore for oil deposits and do mud logging, analyzing the material that comes up for clues about oil. It's tough and messy work, and looking at your application, you don't have any qualifications that show you're capable of it. I'm taking the time to train you, and I know you might think it's too hard and give up on me. But, Zach stammered. That man was not going to accept Zach's excuse of, I tried, but Nicole's dad wouldn't hire me. Zach could feel the pain from the punch he had received. So here's your chance, son. Show me I'm wrong. Prove to me that if I hire you, you'll stick around after your first paycheck, Chris said. Just then, his phone rang and he sighed. Good timing, son. You have a few minutes to think about what to say. He smiled. That's my girlfriend. She never listens when I say, honey, I'm busy. Please be quick. Zach felt his thoughts racing. Telling the man that he felt threatened didn't seem wise, and sharing that he needed money to pay child support to someone he no longer had a relationship with, especially when that someone was the man's daughter, didn't seem like a good idea either. No, Nikki, I'm in the middle of something, Chris said. Okay, see you at 7. Love you too. Bye. Sorry about that, Chris said with a smile. Now, what were you going to say? Finally, Chris shook his head. Son, I think you have dreams that are too low. You don't have the skills or the ambition to work here, Chris stated as he stood up. You might want to consider fast food instead. Forget you, Zach shot back. No, son. Life will give you the challenges you need to face, Chris responded lightly as he showed Zach out of his office. Was that Nicole's boyfriend? Sandra asked as she walked into Chris's office carrying a cup of coffee. Yes, Chris replied, still focused on his computer. Are you going to hire him? Sandra asked. Mind your own business, Sandra, Chris replied. But Chris, he's Nicole's boyfriend, the father of your grandchild, she said, concerned. And he's not someone I want on my team, Chris said, accepting the coffee. But, Sandra protested. Sandra, Nicole hasn't asked me to help him, nor has she come to me for help, Chris said firmly. And even if she does, I'm not sure I would. Does Nikki know how harsh you can be? Sandra asked sharply. Why don't you ask her yourself? Chris said casually, then returned to his emails. The work was tough. Being a waitress was no easy task. The hours seemed long, and by the end of her shift, she was exhausted. The pay was not great compared to the effort she put in, but the tips were nice. Many of the older customers appreciated her service and made sure to sit at her tables. Harriet smiled to herself as she watched Anne-Marie take care of the regular customers. You're popular because of your charm, Harriet said, noticing Anne-Marie making sure her uniform was neat and tidy. Well, if you have it, why not use it? Anne-Marie replied with a playful grin. Exactly, Harriet laughed. Mr. Trapani had called a few times, but he never left messages when Anne-Marie let it go to voicemail. She secretly wished he would, so she could go to Mrs. Trapani with proof, or even gently remind Mr. Trapani to be careful. Eventually, he stopped calling altogether. An elderly man shook his head playfully as Anne-Marie filled his coffee cup. What would it take for me to spend some time with you tonight? Not happening, Anne-Marie replied with a smile, pointing to his wedding ring. I don't get involved with married men. It doesn't mean anything to me, he insisted, trying to take off his ring. It means something to me, Anne-Marie said, her smile fading. I made that mistake once. It was a big regret. Nicole cheered for Sophia as she tried her best to stand up. Did you fall down? Nicole comforted her as Sophia did just that. That's okay. Let's try again, all right? It was tough to admit, but taking care of a baby was a lot of work and harder than she expected. Yet, it was filled with love, and she discovered how much she truly cared for Sophia. Sometimes it even frustrated her when her mom reminded her that Sophia was her sister, not her child. Nicole's own belly was starting to show, a small hint of what was coming. She shook her head, wondering how she ever thought she loved Zach right. She had seen him recently at Taco Bell, where he seemed to do the bare minimum at work. A customer in front of her even asked for someone else to prepare their meal instead of him. Hey, Wright, can you speed it up a little? The manager called to him. Nicole almost giggled when she noticed he was missing a tooth, which made him look unkempt. Yeah, let's hope he washes his hands before cooking, Nicole joked with the manager, who smiled back at her. Yes, ma'am. What would you like to order? He asked. The manager, while collecting trays from the dining area, checked in on her. All good, she replied with a smile. Glad to hear. Hope to see you again, he said, clearly meaning it. As for Zach, she found out he was giving her $75 a week. At first, she thought about spending it on new clothes, but then she decided to be sensible. Nicole and her mom went to the bank to open a checking account. They used some money from her birthday and some extra cash that her mom added from her tips. Nicole made sure to keep track of every check Zach sent her and all the bills she had to pay. When they were at the bank, the manager smiled at them. Is this little sweetheart your daughter? he asked while waving at Sophia. Nope, she's my baby sister, Nicole said proudly. Zach felt annoyed watching Nicole smile and joke with the manager. It bothered him that she was so friendly with someone he didn't like. Hey, we have customers waiting, Fred, another worker, called out, making Zach frown as Nicole laughed. I'm Nicole Dumas. Nicole introduced herself as Fred handed her a tray. Really? He replied with a grin. I'm Fred Dumas. No way, Nicole laughed. Who's your dad? They talked for a moment and discovered they might be very distant relatives. Just then, a group of teenagers came in, and Fred got busy helping them. Bye, Sophia, Fred called as they left, and Nicole smiled. Say bye, Mr. Fred, Nicole encouraged, but Sophia just looked around without responding. Nicole helped make a cake, adding icing between the layers. She loved lots of icing. He mixed in some sugar and applied the frosting to the outside of the cake. Nicole had a big appetite, although she often said she wanted to lose weight. She didn't really exercise and always wanted dessert with her meals. She believed that no meal was complete without something sweet, so he made sure to prepare a treat for her. She brought joy and laughter into his life. Although he had heard Harold say that his daughter lived in a fantasy world, he didn't think Harold meant harm. Nicole made him happy. He supported her dreams as much as he could, even buying her a special ring. He placed the cake in the freezer and turned over the chicken cooking in the pan. Just then, there was a cheerful knock on the door. It's open, he called out while adding onions and peppers to the mix. Hey, she said, bouncing into the room. Hey, he replied, noticing a curvy woman with dark hair entering the apartment, glancing around shyly. Oh, hi, Chris. This is Michelle, but everyone calls her Mickey. Do you see? Nikki and Mickey? Nikki was my manager at the drive-thru. One day, she said she was tired of eating McDonald's. I replied, my fiancé is the best cook ever. She laughed and said, no, he's not. So I brought her to our place because I knew he was a great cook. I asked him if he had gotten the wine I mentioned before because it goes perfectly with chicken. The food smelled wonderful. Then Nikki said, say hi to Chris for me. I need to use the restroom. And she rushed off, leaving Chris and Mickey standing there. Hi, can you close the door, please? Chris said as he quickly added fajita sauce to the pan. I hope it's okay, Mickey stammered. She insisted I come. Mickey was attractive, even with her hair in her face. She was not as heavy as Nikki, but she had a few extra pounds. She brushed her hair back and smiled shyly at Chris. When Nikki returned, she gave Chris a warm kiss. Are you two getting along? She asked, then looked in the fridge. Mickey, would you like something to drink? She offered. Chris has beer, and oh, you got that wine. Also, there's gin and tequila in the freezer. We're having a fun night. I like tequila, Mickey said softly. Margaritas are already mixed in the pitcher, Nikki, Chris called out as he took the tortillas out of the oven. Great! Nikki cheered as she poured drinks for herself and Mickey. Wow, Nikki, are you trying to get me drunk? Mickey asked, taking a big sip. Chris smiled as he set 2 plates on the small coffee table in front of the love seat since he only had 2 chairs. Just because it's in your glass doesn't mean you have to finish it all, he joked, giving Nikki a playful pat. Dinner's ready. He made himself a plate and sat in his comfy brown leather recliner. Is this real leather? Mickey asked as she settled on the love seat. Yep, Chris replied. I just love how leather feels, Mickey said. This is really good. Feel free to enjoy the couch, Chris teased. Chris, Nikki exclaimed, playfully hitting him on the arm. You're awful. You just want to see her in a swimsuit? Oh, I didn't say that, Chris grinned. But you didn't say you wouldn't either. I'm not dumb, Nikki laughed. You're right, Mickey, this is delicious. Everything Chris makes is great. He really is a talented chef. They spent time looking through his CD collection, giggling at his older country music while Chris poured raspberry syrup over slices of chocolate cake. Finally, both Nikki and Mickey found a song they liked and added it to his music system. He tossed the empty bottle into the trash and set the 2 plates down on the coffee table. Ooh, dessert too? Mickey asked, as Garth Brooks played from the speakers. Uh-huh, he's the best, Nikki replied, leaning heavily against Chris. She hugged him tightly and kissed him softly. I love you, baby, she said. Love you too, he replied, smiling. So what now? Mickey asked, digging into the cake with her fork. What do you mean? Nikki wondered. I mean, what do you all do after dinner? Play cards or something? Mickey asked. No, we usually just hang out after we eat, Nikki said with a laugh. What do you want to do? Chris asked Mickey, sitting comfortably in a small chair. I don't know, Mickey replied, her voice hinting that she had an idea. I do have a deck of cards around here, Chris said. We could play a game. You said you like leather. That takes too long, Mickey said, standing up. She pulled the empty wine bottle from the trash and giggled while bringing it into the living room. Let's play a game with a twist, she said, her cheeks pink. If the bottle points to you, you have to kiss that person and take off one piece of clothing, okay? Chris glanced at Nikki and shrugged. True to her nature, Nikki grabbed the bottle and spun it enthusiastically. The bottle spun and stopped at Nikki. What? Now I have to kiss myself? She laughed. No, just take something off, Mickey giggled. But you can spin again. Maybe don't spin it so hard, Chris suggested as Nikki removed a shoe. The two girls looked at each other. The bottle pointed to Mickey. Nikki leaned in and pressed her lips to Mickey's, surprised when Mickey's breath brushed against her. Nikki took off her other shoe, and Mickey kicked off one sneaker before spinning the bottle again. Both girls let out shrieks when the bottle pointed to Nikki. Give me a real kiss this time, Mickey said playfully. After they kissed for a moment, Mickey took off her other sneaker while Nikki removed a sock. Chris smiled, enjoying the game as he remained in jeans while both Nikki and Mickey were now in their underwear. He knew he would get to see more of Mickey soon, as it was her turn to spin. The room felt warm, and both girls seemed to enjoy the lighthearted fun. Chris felt comfortable as he watched them, glad to be a part of the moment. The group gathered around, playing a casual game with lighthearted energy. The bottles spun on the table, creating playful moments and laughter as they interacted. Each spin resulted in fun exchanges of glances and teasing gestures, keeping the atmosphere light and carefree. Chris leaned over to kiss the person the bottle landed on, which added to the fun, while everyone playfully joined in the game. Nikki, full of energy, cheered when she was the only one still dressed, teasing the others. The laughter continued to fill the room as they shared jokes and enjoyed the moment. As the evening wore on, Chris suggested coffee, noticing it was getting late. His comment brought more laughter as the group continued to joke with one another, with Nikki and Mickey exchanging humorous whispers. The playful mood remained as they teased and laughed, engaging in harmless fun. But eventually, they began to wind down for the evening. Chris set about making coffee, trying to steer the conversation in a lighter direction, while the others continued their banter. The night ended with everyone still chuckling, their playful interactions leaving them with fond memories of the evening. The coffee was a welcome break, and the group settled into a calmer, more relaxed atmosphere as the night came to a close. The last drops fell onto Chris's thigh. Stop it, Mickey laughed at Nikki. Let me help you, Nikki said, kneeling down and gently cleaning Chris's mess from Mickey's skin. She cleaned her friend and then gave her a soft kiss. The two friends hugged tightly, leaning into each other. Mickey held Nikki's arm and brought her hand down gently. Keep going, she encouraged Nikki. Yeah, me too, Nikki replied, guiding Mickey's hand closer. Chris watched with interest as his fiancée shared a moment with another woman. I really like this, Mickey breathed and pulled Nikki closer to the couch. She lay back, drawing Nikki onto her. The two hugged and kissed as they relaxed on the small couch. Have you done this before? Mickey asked, catching her breath. Yes, Nikki giggled and shifted a bit, bringing her face closer to Mickey's. Oh, wow, Mickey exclaimed, as she felt something wonderful wash over her. That feels great, Nikki yelled as Mickey playfully engaged. Wait, we can't leave Chris all alone, Nikki said and got up. Come on, let's get ready. Nikki moved to the bed and waited for her friend. Me too, Mickey said, joining her. Chris smiled as he moved closer to Mickey. Nikki leaned forward to share a kiss with Chris, enjoying the moment with both of them. That's nice, she murmured as they shared a kiss. Hey, what are you doing here? Fred smiled as Nicole honked her horn at him. You said your car was in the shop, she replied. I didn't want you walking home in the dark. It's not safe. You didn't have to do this, he said, getting into the passenger seat. I didn't? Nicole asked. Then she paused. Oh, all right, get out. Come on, he laughed, taking off his cap. She smiled as she teased him about his hair. What? He questioned. Where am I going? Nicole asked. Oh, just go down Ambassador Caffrey and turn right. I have a place nearby, Fred said. Zach rolled his eyes as he got into his car and turned up some old metal music for his ride home. Fred felt pleased to be getting a ride with Nicole. Just wait until he learned that Nicole expected something in return every time she helped him out. Do you, want to come inside and see my place? Fred said, a bit nervous. You didn't come all this way at 11:30 at night just because you needed a ride. Nicole smiled and leaned closer to give him a light kiss. She playfully touched his mustache. You might want to think about shaving that off, she laughed. Hey, I like my mustache, he responded. Okay, you can keep it, she said as she stepped out of the car. But that means no more kisses for you. And who said I wanted to kiss you? Just teasing, he joked while leading her to the walkway. Good night, she said, and turned to leave. Hang on, he said, pulling her in for a warm hug. His place was typical for a bachelor, an old couch that had seen better days, supported by a few books, and a coffee table that looked worn down. In front of the couch was a large television that sat on a shelf made of cinder blocks and boards. The dining area was empty, except for a single bar stool at the kitchen island. Nicole looked around, mildly amused. If this was how he furnished his space, she couldn't imagine what his bedrooms looked like. Well, I haven't had much time to shop for furniture, Fred admitted, seeing his home through her eyes. Most stores are open on Sundays, Nicole replied. Honestly, I never thought I needed anything nice. I never thought someone as beautiful as you would be here, Fred said. Well, I'm here now, she stated firmly. So what's next? We're going to need a table and chairs. Where are Sophia and I supposed to sit? I'm off tomorrow. I'll get a table, Fred promised. Wow, I can be so demanding, Nicole said, dropping onto the couch. We aren't even dating yet, and I'm acting like it. You're not demanding, Fred said, sitting next to her. Yeah, I am, she said. You have a right to your own space and stuff. Well, I want to get a table and some chairs, too, Fred replied. And if you really like that mustache, then keep it, Nicole said. I'd rather kiss you, Fred admitted. Really? She smiled. Yeah, he responded as he made a move closer. There was a moment of tension, both feeling a rush of emotions. Listen, I need to be honest with you, she said, pausing as she prepared for an important revelation. Yeah? He whispered, leaning in closer. I'm pregnant, Nicole said, feeling a knot in her stomach as she awaited his reaction. Seriously? Fred asked, placing a gentle hand on her belly. Is that what this is? I wanted to suggest that you might want to drink less Pepsi and maybe try Diet Pepsi instead. Does that bother you? She asked, leaning in for another kiss. Nicole, I noticed the first time you came in, Fred replied. I thought, wow, lucky guy to be with her. I wish it was me. I wish it was too, Nicole said, shivering a bit. I should go, she said, pushing herself up with some effort. Are you sure? He asked. Yeah, she smiled, giving him a gentle touch. I just don't want to come across as someone who's too forward. I wouldn't think that, he said quickly, and she laughed. Good night, Fred, she said as she walked toward the door. It took her a little while to step outside into the cool night air, and she hurried to her car. Once inside, she couldn't help but give in to her feelings for a moment. Fred was feeling frustrated. He had told Nikki that work was really busy. There was a hurricane approaching the oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, and a tropical storm was moving over Cuba at the same time. As soon as that storm hit the warm waters, it would turn into a hurricane too. The hurricane was already a Category 3 and growing stronger. He couldn't leave anyone on the rigs. It would be dangerous for anyone to remain there exposed to the weather. But he needed to ensure that the right safety measures were in place. Nikki didn't really understand that. What's up, baby? He answered the phone. Hey, it's me! Her voice sounded heavy and tired. I'm in the middle of something, he said, trying to keep calm, although he felt like shouting. Listen, I know you don't want to see me anymore because I'm not what you expected, Nikki said, her voice breaking a little. Nikki, I do want to see you, he assured her. It's just that there's a hurricane out there and another one might be coming. I'll handle that, Nikki said. He could hear her fumbling with something. Then there was a loud noise. I'm unhappy, Nicole cried as she looked in the mirror. You're expecting a baby, Fred reminded her. I can't go out like this, Nicole said, stepping out of the bathroom in her bright red bikini, which didn't fit comfortably over her belly. Just wear your sundress then. You can sit with Sophia and watch us swim, he replied, picking up the squirming baby. We'll be playing in the cool water, and you'll be sitting there in the hot sun, feeling tired and unhappy while we have fun. But that's okay. You seem fine being upset because you're not happy with how you look. I dislike you, she said, grabbing the towels. Same here. He smiled and gave her a quick kiss. It's too bad, really, because you look nice in that swimsuit. You're silly, she replied, making sure to put sunscreen on Sophia's skin. I feel so big. And still lovely, he smiled, guiding them out of the condo. She didn't need to worry about her looks. The three women at the pool were just as big as she and Fred were together. Their swimsuits revealed their bodies in a way that surprised her. And you were worried? Fred whispered to her. Uh-huh, she whispered back and took Sophia from him. You ready? She asked the baby, and walked into the cool water with her. Sophia's eyes widened as the cool water touched her. She laughed and giggled in her sweet way. Wow, one of the larger women said with a smirk. Just had one and you're already expecting another? She's my sister, not my daughter, Nicole replied sharply. But I can see why you'd think that. I'm very motherly. What? Fred whispered, taking the squirming Sophia from her arms. A motherly type. That's what people like them call regular moms, Nicole whispered back as the three women glared at her. Oh, he said, smiling at them. I'm in Unit 2217. What about you? They didn't respond, and his smile faded. I'm asking again, what unit are you in? He said. Do you have permission to be here? Yes, we do, one of the women snapped. We're in Unit 1612, all right? Thank you, Fred replied. 2217? Nicole asked him. We're in. Why would I want them to know where we stay? He cut her off. He and Nicole played with the baby. After a while, they were all quite wet. He carefully dried the now fussy Sophia before handing her back to Nicole and drying himself. He motioned for her to go ahead while he gathered their things and went back to Unit 2127. Nicole looked around at the furniture. He had asked her favorite color, and now the apartment was filled with red. He even bought a simple table and 4 chairs and stained them a cherry color. There was also a high chair to match. The bookcase and entertainment center were cherry red too. The couch and recliner were a bright red microfiber. Upstairs, he had replaced the old futon with a real bed, complete with red bedding and pillow covers. He came in and set down their bag by the door. She turned and looked at him. He had shaved off that scratchy, silly mustache for her the night she drove him home from work. I love you. I'm so in love with you, she said, and kissed him with all her heart. Wow, he said when she finally pulled away. I love you too. He wasn't the most handsome man she had ever met. His thinning brown hair and dull brown eyes were pretty ordinary. His skin had some scars from acne, and his nose was a bit big. But he was a good man, a caring man. If she wore high heels, she could be taller than him, and he was starting to show a little bit of extra weight on his skinny frame. But he always tried to make her happy. When he talked about the condo, he called it ours, not mine. He said it was where we live, not where I live. She didn't pay any bills, didn't help with the household expenses at all, and still lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with her mother. But he called it ours. He even gave her a key to the condo. Sometimes, when she knew he was busy with work, she would go there and cook dinner for them. She looked into his kind eyes and made a choice. I'm tired of this, she said. I want us to be together all the time, okay? Are you serious? He asked, surprised. Are you sure? Fred, you don't want me? She asked, feeling a bit scared. Maybe he just liked having her around for fun and said he loved her but didn't truly mean it. Are you kidding? He said. I hate it when you leave, when you and Sophia go back home and I'm here all alone. She was supposed to be taking this medication the doctor gave her, Harold said quietly, sounding empty. She didn't like it, said it made her gain weight. If Chris hadn't been so sad, he might have laughed. It wasn't the medicine that made Nikki gain weight, it was her choices. Mickey came over and hugged Chris tightly, crying loudly. He felt bad as he held her. He still remembered the moments they all shared just a week ago. Nikki's words about not wanting to see her because she was different hurt his heart. She thought he was avoiding her because of what she and Mickey had done together, not because of the storms outside. His heart sank a bit more. Why did this happen? He thought as he looked at her father. She could have taken her medicine. Come on, he thought as Mickey leaned against him. He had been saying a prayer for his fiancée when Mickey approached him. After she walked away to chat with some of Nicky's friends, he tried to continue with his prayers. A minute later, he realized he couldn't focus. He sighed, put the prayer beads back into their pouch, and then into his coat pocket. "Hey, how are you?" Sweet William asked quietly as he sat down next to Chris. "This is all pointless," Chris said, speaking loudly. "I get that," Sweet William replied. "You know, we were supposed to get married in this church," Chris said with a hint of anger. "Really?" the large man replied, looking around. "It is a nice place for a wedding." "Too late for that now," Chris said. "I know you're hurting," Sweet William said, his voice low but strong. "But it's not you in that box. You're still alive." "I'm not so sure about that, Sweet William," Chris said. "I just don't know." Anne-Marie glared at Nicole. Sophia's ears were sunburned, and she had some new freckles from being outside so much. Anne-Marie wasn't really angry at Nicole. She was feeling envious. She worked hard every day for not much pay, and even then she often needed extra cash from her dad. Meanwhile, Nicole was raising her child and seemed to have fun while Anne-Marie had to work. "That's being an adult," Harriet said when Anne-Marie complained. "You work while others enjoy themselves. Remember how many years you just had fun while what was his name, Carl? Worked hard?" "Chris," Anne-Marie corrected her. "His name was Chris, and you're right." "Of course I am," Harriet said and rushed to help with another order. Now Nicole was excitedly talking about moving in with Fred. Anne-Marie thought Fred was okay, but knew that Nicole liked him for who he was, not for his looks. But this meant Anne-Marie would need to spend more money on a babysitter or daycare for Sophia. "But his condo is easy to get to. Just come down Arasti Landry, take a left on Ambassador Caffrey, and it's right there. You can drop Sophia off before work or I can pick her up." Nicole kept chatting as she packed a box on her bed. If they let her move into a one-bedroom apartment, that could save her some money on rent and utilities too. "Do you love him?" Anne-Marie asked suddenly. Yeah," Nicole said after thinking for a moment. "I mean, he doesn't make my heart race when I see him, but Mom, he makes me feel important. Everything he does it for me." "Let me tell you something," Anne-Marie said earnestly. "He does everything. Don't let that slip away, and don't ever give it up for someone who just makes you feel excited. Your dad, Chris, was the best thing ever, and look where that got me, chasing after Tom just because he stirred up my feelings." "Yeah," Nicole replied, rubbing her rounded belly. "You caught my moment of excitement, huh?" "Good, so you already know what I'm talking about," Anne-Marie said, giving Nicole an affectionate hug before leaving the girl's room. He looked around as he stood in line at the University of Louisiana at DeGard. There were only 3 people in line ahead of him to sign up for Mexican cooking, but the woman at the front was arguing loudly with the instructor, delaying everyone. Automobile maintenance, leather arts and crafts, organic gardening, learning guitar, and a few other booths were in the hallway, but there was no motorcycle maintenance booth, no April. "Hi," the woman said with a tired smile. He returned the smile and quickly signed up without asking questions. "We meet here, well, actually in the Science Building, Emily Hall," she said with a strong accent. "Classes are every Thursday night from 6:30 until 9. Is that okay?" "Sounds great." He smiled and wrote out a check for the tuition. "Who should I make this out to?" She told him the name, laughed at his face, then spelled it for him. "See you Thursday. Hope you're ready to eat." She smiled as he shrugged and walked out of the hall. "That is a nice bike," a man said as Chris swung his leg over it. "Thanks. It's a piece of American history, a 1949 Indian chief, all original parts." Chris smiled and started the engine. "I'd give anything to own one of those," the man said. "Nah, they don't cost that much," Chris replied with a grin. "I had to let go of my unfaithful wife and my difficult child." "Where do I sign up for that?" the man chuckled. "What are you so cheerful about?" Zach scoffed at Fred while the manager rushed around the store. "Because every day when I wake up and see my face in the mirror, it's not yours looking back," Fred replied, finishing up at the counter. Sure, you'd prefer my face over that ugly mug of yours, Zack jeered, ignoring the work that needed to be done. Right. Could you actually take some initiative and do something without me asking? Fred said while carrying sauce packets to the self-service area. Why would I do that? Zack replied. Because when performance reviews come around, I might remember it and consider giving you a raise, Fred said, smiling as an older couple entered the store. His smile grew as he watched the man and woman, both in their late 50s, looking at the menu. They were holding hands. The man whispered something to the woman, and she listened closely. He imagined himself and Nicole doing that in 30 years, holding hands. Then his smile wavered. The woman had no color in her eyes. She was blind. But his smile returned as they shared a quick kiss and approached the cash register. Welcome to Taco Bell. May I take your order? He asked happily. Go ahead, dear. Tell him what you want, the man encouraged softly. That's just strange, Zack murmured as he observed the couple. Why? Fred replied, a bit defensive. What's so strange? I mean, she can't see and it gives me the creeps just looking at her, Zack said, shuddering a bit. Honestly, it's a wonder someone hasn't put you out of your misery, Fred said with a grin as he walked around the dining area. Thank you. Come again, he called out as they left. He chuckled when he saw the man jokingly pinch the woman, making her laugh and playfully swat his hand away before leaning against him. The man then helped her to the passenger side of the small car and hurried back to his side. How are you, Mr. Dumas? Cam Powell, his tenant in apartment 22, asked as Chris unlocked the door to apartment 1. She was a Vietnamese refugee, one of the boat people saved off the coast of San Francisco in 1982. She had seen the Viet Cong force her brother into the military, then witnessed them harm her father and laugh. She had hidden while soldiers hurt her mother and sister and left them behind. Then she had taken her younger sister, and they escaped from the hut, running through the fields to find safety. They stayed away from the roads, which were often full of enemy soldiers hiding in the thick bushes. They waited for silence or night to fall before moving south toward the American troops and safety. When they spotted the American soldiers practicing, they smiled and ran toward them, thankful for their help. Suddenly, there was a loud burst of gunfire, and her sister was hurt badly. The American soldiers quickly took down the machine gun nest, and one brave Marine ran into the open field to see if he could help the girls. Cam Powell watched in amazement as the young man cried over her sister's body, even though he did not know her. She reached out to comfort him, but then everything went dark. When she woke up, she was in an American hospital. She thanked Buddha for saving her life. The doctors did their best, but they could not save her left leg and had to remove it above the knee. 4 days later, the enemy soldiers took over the hospital, causing great harm to the staff and patients. The American patients lost their lives. The Vietnamese patients, no matter how badly they were hurt, were forced to march away. Cam Powell tried to use the crutches the kind American nurse had given her before the soldiers arrived. When she fell behind in the march, she was mistreated. She did her best to keep up since those who lagged behind often faced severe consequences and were left on the roadside. For the next 11 years, she worked hard in the fields, facing tough times but trying to survive. She wasn't very attractive, so she was often treated harshly instead of being hurt more seriously. She saved food and money, dreaming of one day reaching the land of the Americans with blonde hair. One day, news spread among the refugees that it was too expensive to take care of them, which meant they were in great danger. Cam Powell ate what little she could and hid some food for later. When night came, she quietly slipped into the thick brush behind her hut and made her way to the river. Her crutches had been stolen, so she fashioned a new one from bamboo, which was not easy to use but worked well enough. At night, she followed the river south, hiding during the day. With her food running out, she sought bugs and plants to eat while waiting for it to get dark. Moving through the muddy bank was slow, but she kept pushing forward. Eventually, she found a man with a boat who planned to take people to America. Eagerly, she gave him the little money she had and let him use her as he pleased. She felt worried when she saw how small the boat was. She was even more scared when she realized over 40 people were packed into the tiny space. "No refunds," the man shouted when others complained or expressed concerns. "Better to fight for my freedom than to be treated badly." Cam Pow thought to herself as she joined the struggling crowd on the boat. As the journey went on, she and a few others became very sick, and she hoped for her pain to end soon. Then the hatch opened, and she knew her hopes were answered. A blond man in a Coast Guard uniform looked down at the people on the boat. She got a prosthetic leg at a charity hospital and learned how to use it like it was her own. A man in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana heard about Cam Pow and her fellow travelers. He offered jobs to 6 of them at his crawfish processing plant. She accepted the job eagerly and was amazed at the good pay he offered. She found an apartment and lived there for 24 years. She rode her bike, no matter the weather, even when it snowed, but she never missed a day of work. "I'm good, Miss Pow. How are you today?" Chris smiled at the small woman. Her long black hair was starting to get some gray, but her face showed no signs of age. That was the extent of their conversation. She would greet him and then close herself in her apartment. Anne-Marie looked around the condominium and felt a twinge of jealousy. She was working hard every day, and all she could afford was her rundown apartment while Nicole stayed home all day, living in a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom place. The furniture was a bit loud. It wasn't her style, but the table and chairs were okay, even if they had strange colors. But it still looked a lot better than the furniture she got from the discount store. "Okay, kiddo," Anne-Marie said to Sophia, pushing away another feeling of resentment. The child was reaching out to Nicole. "I'm working the late shift. I'll be back around 10 or 10:30 to get you." "Thanks, Mom. Have a great day." Nicole smiled brightly. "You too, baby," Anne-Marie said, and left with a final kiss for both daughters. "I don't think she likes me," Fred said quietly. "What? Why?" Nicole asked, taking a seat beside him on the sofa. Sophia made some sounds in her own way. The child was almost a year old and should have been speaking by now, at least saying mama or dada, but she just made little noises. "She never says hi or anything," Fred complained. "Fred, hold Sophia for a minute and face her away from me," Nicole said as she stood up. "Boo!" she shouted from behind Sophia. Fred jumped, startled. Sophia stayed still and did not respond. "What's going on?" Fred shouted at Nicole. Sophia seemed not to hear the loud noise Fred made. "I'm going to try again," Nicole said, tears starting to fall down her cheeks. She attempted to shout boo, but could only manage a soft sound. Fred looked at the little girl and felt tears welling up in his own eyes. "Sophia?" he asked gently. "Sweetheart, can you hear me? Can you hear Sissy?" Cooking alone was not enjoyable. There was no Nicky there, playfully asking him to taste what he was making. The Mexican cooking class was fun. Some women in the class showed they were interested in him, but he just wasn't feeling it. "I should have chosen Chinese instead," he thought as he chopped a jalapeno pepper for the sauce. "Well, it's only 2 more weeks," he sighed as he mixed lime juice and cilantro. He had seen Mickey walking to a fast food place the day before. Her pants fit tightly, and it made him feel a rush of emotions, which he quickly felt guilty about. They had shared moments together, but he hesitated to think too much about it. "Why won't this chicken cook right?" he muttered as he noticed it starting to burn. "She's not a doctor, so who does she think she is?" Anne-Marie said sharply as Nicole shared her concerns. "Just watch," Fred replied firmly, unconcerned about how Anne-Marie felt. He clapped 2 books together behind Sophia, but the child didn't even blink. "That is your grandson," Sandra said sharply, returning Chris's angry look with one of her own. "Yes, I sent a gift for Freddie, including a card. By the way, Mr. Tough Guy, you owe me. I bought your grandson a savings bond and a silver rattle with his initials on it." "Sandra, I can't believe this," Chris grumbled, teeth clenched. "Oh, just fire me, fine. Just fire me for caring about you," Sandra shouted at her boss, the man she admired almost as much as her husband. "I'll be back," he said sharply, leaving the office before he ended up firing her, the person who kept everything running smoothly. She heard the loud roar of his motorcycle as he sped away. Highway 52 was clear. There were few stops to hold back his anger. He occasionally found a quiet side street and opened up his bike, letting the strong engine roar beneath him. Before he knew it, he was on Evangeline Thruway and then traveled down to West Congress Street, heading to University Medical Center. Fred Dumas didn't notice the tall man holding a motorcycle helmet. He was completely captivated by Frederick Freddie James Dumas, Jr. If he had any doubts about Nicole's love for him, those worries faded when she named their baby after him. He fought the urge to tap on the glass of the nursery. Freddie was fast asleep. "He's such a cute little guy, isn't he?" the man said to Fred. "Yes, he is," Fred replied. "He's my son." "Congratulations," Chris said. "Just remember, they grow up fast. One day they won't need you as much. You might feel like you're just here to pay for things." "Yeah, I'm really hoping that doesn't happen," Fred admitted. "Good luck, son," Chris said as he walked away. Anne-Marie was trying to manage a fussy Sophia and looked again. The man by the elevators seemed familiar, tall, strong, dressed well, even with a motorcycle helmet under his arm. The man turned slightly and Anne-Marie smiled. He was attractive, even with a bald head and some gray hair around the sides. Then she froze. Those brown eyes belonged to Chris. The elevator door opened and Chris stepped in, pressing the button for the first floor. "Your father was here?" she asked Nicole. "Daddy's here?" Nicole replied, surprised and a bit shy. "No, he was here," Anne-Marie said, feeling a bit let down. She hoped to hear from Nicole about how he was doing, what was new in his life. She kept in touch with Sandra. Harriet let her use the computer at work, and Sandra always replied quickly to her emails, but she didn't share many details. She had known about Nikki's tragic decision and was aware of Sandra's dislike for her, but she didn't know how Chris had changed. Until today, she didn't even realize that Chris had a motorcycle, as the helmet showed. Honestly, she wanted to hear that Chris missed her and wanted her back in his life. She was hoping he had forgiven her for her past mistake. She clenched her teeth in frustration as Sophia reached out to Nicole, trying to get her to hold her. "Hey, there she is!" Hank called out from the doorway. "There's the girl who made me a great-grandfather!" Anne-Marie winced. Ever since her mother's passing, her father had been drinking a lot. As he walked into the room, Nicole caught a whiff of alcohol on him. "Hi, Grandpa," Nicole said, leaning in for a kiss. "So, you named him after me, right?" Hank asked, overlooking Anne-Marie, Sophia, and Fred. "No, Grandpa, I named him after his daddy," Nicole replied, moving his hand away from her. Since Grandma's passing, his touches, although not obvious, felt wrong. His hands often brushed against her in a way that made her uncomfortable, and with her belly getting bigger, she promised herself to keep Sophia away from him. Nicole didn't realize this wasn't her decision to make. Sophia wasn't her child. "Oh, why'd you have to do that?" Hank said with a teasing tone. "Because I love him," Nicole stated firmly. "And don't you love your grandpa?" Hank asked, placing his hand on Nicole's thigh. "Have you seen the baby yet?" Fred asked, trying to keep his anger under control. Hank's drunken behavior towards Nicole made Fred feel sick. His pretending that Fred, Anne-Marie, and Sophia weren't there bothered Fred, but the touching was even worse. "No, I haven't. Are they bringing him in here?" Hank asked. "No, not for another hour or two. They'll bring him when it's time for lunch," Fred said, pulling Hank's hand off Nicole's thigh. "Come on, Mr. Campion, I'll show you Freddie." "Hey, you're feeding him, right?" Hank asked. "Oh my gosh!" Nicole gasped as Fred led Hank out of the room. "I think I'm going to be sick," Anne-Marie said. "You? It's not you he's bothering," Nicole replied. Anne-Marie began to see Fred in a new light. Yes, he worked at a fast food restaurant, but he was dedicated to Nicole and her happiness. He wanted nothing more than to protect her. "So, when are you leaving here?" Anne-Marie asked. "I wanted to talk to you about that, Mom," Nicole said. "I spoke with Fred, and he thinks it's a good idea. Can you and Sophia stay with me for a couple of weeks until I get things figured out?" "What?" Anne-Marie asked. "But honey, it's just a 2-bedroom, right?" "The couch pulls out into a queen-sized bed," Fred said as he walked back into the room. "Mom, I need you. I'm really scared," Nicole admitted. "What if something happens to Freddie? I don't know what I'd do if that ever happened." "Are you sure?" Anne-Marie asked Fred. "Yes, ma'am," Fred replied. "I want you there, and Nicole needs you there." "Where's Grandpa?" Nicole asked. "I sent him to grab us some donuts from Macy's," Fred smiled. "My dad has a drink problem, too. He can't resist anything sugary." "My dad's not a—" Anne-Marie began to argue, but then she stopped. "Are you still upset with me?" Sandra asked. "Furious is more like it," he replied, reaching for his coffee cup. "Well, tough luck," Sandra said as she left the office. That night, as he got ready for the cooking class, he pulled on the bright green sweater she had chosen for him. He then put on the old jeans she had insisted he buy, along with the casual shoes she picked out. The sound of thunder reminded him that he was glad she had urged him to leave the company car parked at his apartment. She got involved in his life, made choices for him that he didn't want to make, but in the end, he was thankful for it. I should get her a card or something, he muttered to himself. At the drugstore, the selection of I'm sorry cards was very small, but he finally picked the least sentimental one. He also grabbed a big pack of gum since she was always chewing it, and he often told her to get rid of it. I'm afraid you're late, the instructor said when he arrived a few minutes late, soaked from the rain. No worries, I just have too many avocados at home, Chris joked. Perfect for tonight's dish, she laughed, and then she began explaining the soup and how to prepare it. Anne-Marie watched as Fred held Sophia on his lap, showing the baby the sign language from the book beside them. Happy, he said, demonstrating the signs, then guiding her hands and arms to do them too. Birth, day, he continued, signing and helping her with the motions. You, he said, playfully tickling her as he pointed to her. What is he doing? Anne-Marie asked Nicole. Teaching her to sign happy birthday, Nicole explained. Her birthday is next week. Happy, Fred said again, making the sign for happy. Watching him, Anne-Marie felt tears well up as he tenderly taught her daughter. He wants to be a teacher one day, Nicole confided. Taco Bell has a program that helps with college funds based on how many hours you work there. Please, come in, Francois Timmons said with a cold smile as two big men pushed Tom Sampo into the small office. Tom smiled despite his swollen eye and cut lip. He knew exactly who Francois Timmons was. He had been involved with Greta Timmons, Francois's 25-year-old wife. Francois had met the tall German beauty while vacationing on the island of Crete. Even though she was only 19 and he was 51, he showered her with gifts and covered expenses for her family. They had married before the vacation ended. Every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, Francois flew his mother-in-law, father-in-law, and two brothers-in-law to Crete. He and Greta would meet them and enjoy a 2-week holiday together. 6 years later, Greta felt the strong desire to become a mother, but Francois was not open to the idea. I am too old, he said. I don't have the energy to keep up with little children, and I can't handle the fuss of babies. When Greta met Tom at a fashion exhibition, she decided that no matter what Francois thought, she wanted to have a baby. Tom was tall, attractive, and had blonde hair, while Francois was shorter and heavier with mostly gray hair. I see you've been enjoying time with my wife, huh? Francois said calmly. Tom smiled, knowing who Greta was and who her husband was. Spending time with Greta had been a fun escape, and he had been discreet about it. He planned to show Francois proof of their meetings, hoping to ask for 2 million euros to leave Greta alone, preserving some of Francois's pride. However, after some trouble from Francois's associates, the amount Tom sought had doubled. If Francois refused to pay, Tom thought it would be easy to expose him online. It's unfortunate what happened to her, isn't it? Francois said, interrupting Tom's thoughts. What do you mean? Tom responded. Oh, you didn't hear? Francois said with a cold smile. It's quite sad. She was out one night and unfortunately got too close to a speeding car. No one knew who was driving as they sped away before anyone could help. Tom felt a chill. He realized he had made a mistake in his choice of partner. Naturally, you'll have a hard time as your car will have evidence of the incident, Francois continued, his smile widening. It wouldn't be surprising if you couldn't bear the weight of it all. You can't, Tom said, alarmed. Happy birthday to you, they sang cheerfully. Sophia giggled, joining in when she understood what they were doing. This led her gaze to the cake with one flickering candle, and she was captivated by the flame. So, what's the sign for make a wish? Anne-Marie asked Fred. I don't know. I didn't look it up, he replied. I'll make one for you, Nicole said, blowing out the candle for her sister. It was just the 5 of them, Sophia, Nicole, Anne-Marie, Fred, and Freddie. Since Sophia was always with Nicole, she didn't have friends to invite to her party. Anne-Marie worked so much that she didn't have anyone to invite either. Fred chose not to invite anyone from work, even though a couple of the women had children. For a moment, Anne-Marie thought about inviting Hank, but decided against it. Chris knew that if they invited him, there was a good chance he'd show up drunk and probably behave inappropriately around Nicole. He was always a little too forward, making her uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Sophia was having a great time tasting the birthday cake. Her eyes widened in delight as she tried the sweet icing, and she eagerly opened her mouth for more. Anne-Marie laughed, genuinely happy to see the little one enjoying herself. After the cake, Anne-Marie handed Sophia a bottle filled with fruit punch, something Sophia had never tasted before. It was a new experience for her, and she eagerly drank it all down, quickly signing more once she was done. Fred laughed. "She definitely knows that sign," he said, taking the bottle to refill it. "Not too much now," Anne-Marie warned. "We want her to sleep later." Afterwards, Anne-Marie and Nicole got down on the floor to help Sophia open her presents. Anne-Marie smiled to herself, knowing Chris hadn't actually bought some of the gifts, like the tricycle and wooden train set. Those were clearly from Sandra, but it didn't matter. Sophia loved them. Fred admired the train set. "Wow, this is really nice," he said, as they all gathered around to watch Sophia play. Maria Espinosa was an excellent cook and teacher, but as a romantic partner, she didn't quite meet Chris's expectations. He found himself comparing her to Nikki, who was much younger. Maria enjoyed Chris's cooking, especially the authentic Mexican dishes and dessert he had prepared, but she didn't hold back her criticism of his kitchen and apartment. "All electric?" she said disapprovingly. No, gas is the only way. Gas gives food its soul, electric just takes that away." She also made comments about his living space. "You're a grown man with a good job, yet you live like a college student?" she remarked as she looked around his small apartment. When she went as far as opening his closet door without asking, Chris was about ready to tell her to leave. That door was closed for a reason, and her constant criticism was wearing thin. Despite all her complaints, Maria still expressed interest in being intimate, but Chris wasn't convinced. She tried to reassure him. "You don't need to worry. I had my tubes tied," she said, laughing. Chris wasn't sure if he believed her, so he stayed cautious, deciding to keep things safe. He found her appearance less appealing than he'd hoped. Her long black hair, which she took pride in, was thick and unkempt in other areas, too. It was more than he was used to, and something that made him uncomfortable. Even though she seemed eager to connect with him, Chris could tell it wasn't for the right reasons. It didn't feel like she was with him because she truly wanted to be, or because she had any real attraction to him. The connection between them felt shallow, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something important was missing. She was with him to feel in control, thinking it would make him behave better. Afterward, she lit a cigarette, but was surprised when Chris took it from her and tossed it into the toilet. "I can't stand the smell of smoke," he said a bit angrily as he walked back into the room. "Oh, my bad," she replied, sounding more upset than sorry. "You should sell that motorbike," she suggested casually. "Not happening," he replied. "Come on, it's dangerous," she insisted, glancing up at him. "Maria," he sighed, getting out of bed and putting on his jeans, "it's late. You were a good teacher and I enjoyed your class, but I don't think we'll meet again, okay?" "But what about us?" she stammered. "What about this?" She threw the covers aside, revealing her body. "What about it?" he asked, putting on his shirt. "Look, Maria, we had a meal and we were together, but you didn't seem to enjoy it." "Oh, but I did," she argued. "You're great." "Honey," he said with a tight smile, "I was in a long marriage. I know the difference between real enjoyment and just trying to get it over with." She had misjudged him. In class, he always seemed willing to listen. She thought he would be the same outside the classroom. He had done well in class, and she almost felt pleased at the thought of his efforts. As he moved closer, she entertained thoughts that were not as kind. But he was ending things, making it clear that this was a one-time deal. The doctor was telling her about a hearing problem. Mona Wahlberg explained that an implant would not help the baby at all. Poor Fred, Anne-Marie thought as she secured the baby in the car seat. He researched everything, found the doctor who specializes in these procedures, and even offered to use his college savings. Poor Sophia, Anne-Marie thought, glancing at the child in the mirror. She'll be like that for the rest of her life, completely unable to hear. She almost missed seeing the motorcycle, and the rider expressed his anger with a rude gesture. "Same to you," Anne-Marie thought as she watched the bike zoom by. Female drivers, Chris thought as he turned off Highway 19. The bike was stunning and easy to control. Most importantly, it didn't make him feel uncomfortable while riding. He loved his Indian chief for its power and even saw it as a piece of history, but he knew comfort wasn't part of its design. "What do you think?" George Farmer asked as Chris parked his bike at George's garage. "Nice and easy to ride," Chris smiled. "If it were wet, it would be quite an adventure." "Uh-huh, and if Big Mike hears you, he'll give you a hard time for saying that," George chuckled. "And he's asking for $17,000, right?" Chris asked, noticing the other mechanic sleeping under the truck. "Yeah, but between us," George said, glancing at John Farmer and then looking away awkwardly. "He's been trying to sell it for 2 months. He might take 15 if it's cash." "Tell him 15 cash," Chris said, preparing to get on his Indian. "Got my card, right?" "Yeah," George replied with a smile. "What's the story behind the sale?" Chris asked before starting his bike. "His partner is in rehab dealing with some serious issues and he's adding up a lot of bills," George admitted. "Why drink alone when you can have some company?" Hank thought as he got ready. "I never liked drinking by myself anyway." The bar felt cool and welcoming. He easily found an empty stool since there were only a few people there himself, 2 men in suits, a tired-looking woman, and the bartender who also looked worn out. "Hey there, handsome," the bartender greeted with a weary smile. It had been a while since anyone complimented him like that, so he sat up a bit straighter and grinned back. He made sure she noticed the $100 bill as he took it out of his wallet. "Do you have anything smaller?" Jill asked. "It's only 11 o'clock. I don't have the money for that. If only I had a nickel for every time a woman said that to me," Hank said, and she laughed. He took out a $20 bill, and she gave him change. 5 hours later, some regular customers began to arrive. The jukebox played loud rock music that the afternoon crowd enjoyed, and the conversation got noisy. Hank's good mood faded as the younger men drew more of Jill's attention. He got up and walked out the door. "Just a bunch of troublemakers," he mumbled to himself as he started his car and pulled onto Johnson Street, right in front of a school bus. "That was your father-in-law," Sandra said sharply when Chris asked about the bill from the florist. "I hope you at least had the courtesy to make them arrange the flowers nicely," he replied. "No," she said, standing with her hands on her hips. "I expressed your sympathy and hope that he is at peace." "What?" he shouted, then broke into a loud, bitter laugh. "No, I hope he gets what he deserves." "God is watching you and he hears you," Sandra warned, shaking her finger at him. "You better be careful." "He's not Santa Claus, Sandra," Chris chuckled. "He's not keeping track of who's good or bad." "Do you know why Santa is always so cheerful?" Sweet William asked as he walked in. "No, why?" Chris replied, managing a real smile. "Because he knows where all the naughty girls live," Sweet William laughed. "Man, I want a cool bike like that. Look at those flames. So sweet." "Like that, huh?" Chris said. "I had the bike painted green, can you believe that? So I took it back and had them painted black with flames." "You'll be feeling the heat soon if you're not careful," Sandra warned. "Did you go to Hank's funeral?" Sweet William asked. "No, but I might visit his grave," Chris replied. "I'll make sure to stay hydrated first." "That isn't fair, and you know it," Sweet William said, his smile fading. "I hope you can talk some sense into him," Sandra said as she left the office. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to Infidelity Plus to stay updated with more captivating tales of infidelity and payback. Turn on notifications so you're the first to see our latest content.